Chapter 6: Draco's Detour. Harry remained within the confines of the Burrows' garden over the next few weeks. He spent most of his days playing two-a-side Quidditch in the Weasleys' orchard, he and Hermione against Ron and Ginny. Hermione was dreadful and Ginny good, so they were reasonably well matched, and his evenings eating triple helpings of everything Mrs. Weasley put in front of him. It would have been a happy, peaceful holiday had it not been for the stories of disappearances, odd accidents, even of deaths now appearing almost daily in the Prophet. Sometimes Bill and Mr. Weasley brought home news before it even reached the paper. To Mrs. Weasley's displeasure, Harry's 16th birthday celebrations were marred by grisly tidings brought to the party by Remus Lupin, who was looking gaunt and grim, his brown hair streaked liberally with grey, his clothes more ragged and patched than ever. "There have been another couple of Dementor attacks," he announced, as Mrs. Weasley passed him a large slice of birthday cake. "And they found Igor Karkaroff's body in a shack up north. The dark mark had been set over it. Well, frankly, I'm surprised he stayed alive for even a year after deserting the Death Eaters. Sirius's brother, Regulus, only managed a few days as far as I can remember." "Yes, well," said Mrs. Weasley, frowning, "perhaps we should talk about something different." "Did you hear about Florian Fortescue, Remus?" asked Bill, who was being plied with wine by Fleur. "The man who ran the ice cream place in Diagon Alley?" Harry interrupted, with an unpleasant, hollow sensation in the pit of his stomach. "He used to give me free ice creams." "What's happened to him?" "Dragged off, by the look of his place." "Why?" asked Ron, while Mrs. Weasley pointedly glared at Bill. "Who knows? He must have upset them somehow. He was a good man, Florian." "Talking of Diagon Alley," said Mr. Weasley, "looks like Ollivander's gone too." "The Wandmaker," said Ginny, looking startled. "That's the one. Shop's empty. No sign of a struggle. No one knows whether he left voluntarily or was kidnapped. But wands what'll people do for wands?" "They'll make do with other makers," said Lupin. "But Ollivander was the best, and if the other side have got him it's not so good for us." The day after this rather gloomy birthday tea, their letters and book lists arrived from Hogwarts. Harry's included a surprise. He had been made Quidditch captain. "That gives you equal status with prefects," cried Hermione happily. "You can use our special bathroom now and everything." "Wow, I remember when Charlie wore one of these," said Ron, examining the badge with glee. "Harry, this is so cool, you're my captain. If you let me back on the team, I suppose, ha ha." "Well, I don't suppose we can put off a trip to Diagon Alley much longer now you've got these," sighed Mrs. Weasley, looking down Ron's book list. "We'll go on Saturday, as long as your father doesn't have to go into work again." "I'm not going there without him." "Mum, do you honestly think you know who's going to be hiding behind a bookshelf in Flourish and Blots?" sniggered Ron. "Fortescue and Ollivander went on holiday, did they?" said Mrs. Weasley, firing up at once. "If you think security's a laughing matter, you can stay behind and I'll get your things myself." "No, I wanna come. I want to see Fred and George's shop," said Ron hastily. "Then you just buck up your ideas, young man, before I decide you're too immature to come with us," said Mrs. Weasley angrily, snatching up her clock, all 9 hands of which were still pointing at mortal peril, and balancing it on top of a pile of just laundered towels. "And that goes for returning to Hogwarts as well." Ron turned to stare incredulously at Harry as his mother hoisted the laundry basket and the teetering clock into her arms and stormed out of the room. "Blimey, You can't even make a joke round here anymore." But Ron was careful not to be flippant about Voldemort over the next few days. Saturday dawned without any more outbursts from Mrs. Weasley, though she seemed very tense at breakfast. Bill, who would be staying at home with Fleur, much to Hermione and Ginny's pleasure, passed a full money bag across the table to Harry. "Where's mine?" demanded Ron at once, his eyes wide. "That's already Harry's, idiot," said Bill. "I got it out of your vault for you, Harry, because it's taking about 5 hours for the public to get to their gold at the moment. The goblins have tightened security so much. 2 days ago Archie Philpott had a probity probe stuck up his. Well, trust me, this way's easier." "Thanks, Bill," said Harry, pocketing his gold. "He's always so thoughtful," purred Fleur adoringly, stroking Bill's nose. Ginny mimed vomiting into her cereal behind Fleur. Harry choked over his cornflakes, and Ron thumped him on the back. It was an overcast, murky day. One of the special Ministry of Magic cars, in which Harry had ridden once before, was awaiting them in the front yard when they emerged from the house, pulling on their cloaks. "It's good Dad can get us these again," said Ron appreciatively, stretching luxuriously as the car moved smoothly away from the burrow, Bill and Fleur waving from the kitchen window. He, Harry, Hermione, and Ginny were all sitting in roomy comfort in the wide back seat. "Don't get used to it, it's only because of Harry," said Mr. Weasley over his shoulder. He and Mrs. Weasley were in front with the ministry driver. The front passenger seat had obligingly stretched into what resembled a 2-seater sofa. "He's been given top-grade security status. And will be joining up with additional security at the Leaky Cauldron too." Harry said nothing. He did not much fancy doing his shopping while surrounded by a battalion of Aurors. He had stowed his invisibility cloak in his backpack and felt that, if that was good enough for Dumbledore, it ought to be good enough for the Ministry, though now he came to think of it, he was not sure the Ministry knew about his cloak. "Here you are, then," said the driver, a surprisingly short while later, speaking for the first time as he slowed in Charing Cross Road and stopped outside the Leaky Cauldron. "I'm to wait for you. Any idea how long you'll be?" "A couple of hours, I expect," said Mr. Weasley. "Ah, good, he's here." Harry imitated Mr. Weasley and peered through the window, his heart leapt. There were no Aurors waiting outside the inn, but instead the gigantic, black-bearded form of Rubeus Hagrid, the Hogwarts gamekeeper, wearing a long beaverskin coat, beaming at the sight of Harry's face and oblivious to the startled stares of passing muggles. "Harry," he boomed, sweeping Harry into a bone-crushing hug the moment Harry had stepped out of the car. "Buckbeak Witherwings, I mean yeah, should see him, Harry, he's so happy to be back in the open air." "Glad he's pleased," said Harry, grinning as he massaged his ribs. "We didn't know security meant you." "I know, just like old times, innit? See, the Ministry wanted to send a bunch o' Aurors, but Dumbledore said I'd do," said Hagrid proudly, throwing out his chest and tucking his thumbs into his pockets. "Let's get going then after yeah, Molly." Arthur, the Leaky Cauldron was, for the first time in Harry's memory, completely empty. Only Tom the landlord, wizened and toothless, remained of the old crowd. He looked up hopefully as they entered, but before he could speak, Hagrid said importantly, "Just pass in through today, Tom, sure you understand, Hogwarts business, yeah no." Tom nodded gloomily and returned to wiping glasses. Harry, Hermione, Hagrid, and the Weasleys walked through the bar and out into the chilly little courtyard at the back where the dustbins stood. Hagrid raised his pink umbrella and rapped a certain brick in the wall, which opened at once to form an archway onto a winding cobbled street. They stepped through the entrance and paused, looking around. Diagon Alley had changed. The colorful, glittering window displays of spellbooks, potion ingredients, and cauldrons were lost to view, hidden behind the large Ministry of Magic posters that had been pasted over them. Most of these somber purple posters carried blown-up versions of the security advice on the ministry pamphlets that had been sent out over the summer, but others bore moving black and white photographs of Death Eaters known to be on the loose. Bellatrix Lestrange was sneering from the front of the nearest apothecary. A few windows were boarded up, including those of Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor. On the other hand, a number of shabby-looking stalls had sprung up along the street. The nearest one, which had been erected outside Flourish and Blot's, under a striped, stained awning, had a cardboard sign pinned to its front: amulets, effective against werewolves, dementors, and inferi. A seedy-looking little wizard was rattling armfuls of silver symbols on chains at passers-by. "One for your little girl, madam," he called at Mrs. Weasley as they passed, leering at Ginny. "Protect her pretty neck." "If I were on duty," said Mr. Weasley, glaring angrily at the amulet seller. "Yes, but don't go arresting anyone now, dear, we're in a hurry," said Mrs. Weasley, nervously consulting a list. "I think we'd better do Madam Mawkins first. Hermione wants new dress robes, and Ron's showing much too much ankle in his school robes, and you must need new ones too. Harry, you've grown so much. Come on, everyone." "Molly, it doesn't make sense for all of us to go to Madam Mawkins," said Mr. Weasley. "Why don't those three go with Hagrid, and we can go to Flourish and Blot's and get everyone's school books?" "I don't know," said Mrs. Weasley anxiously, clearly torn between a desire to finish the shopping quickly and the wish to stick together in a pack. "Hagrid, do you think?" "Don't fret. They'll be fine with me, Molly," said Hagrid soothingly, waving an airy hand the size of a dustbin lid. Mrs. Weasley did not look entirely convinced, but allowed the separation, scurrying off toward Flourish and Blot's with her husband and Ginny while Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Hagrid set off for Madam Mawkins. Harry noticed that many of the people who passed them had the same harried, anxious look as Mrs. Weasley, and that nobody was stopping to talk anymore. The shoppers stayed together in their own tightly knit groups, moving intently about their business. Nobody seemed to be shopping alone. "Might be a bit of a squeeze in there with all of us," said Hagrid, stopping outside Madam Mawkins and bending down to peer through the window. "I'll stand guard outside, all right." So Harry, Ron, and Hermione entered the little shop together. It appeared, at first glance, to be empty, but no sooner had the door swung shut behind them than they heard a familiar voice issuing from behind a rack of dress robes in spangled green and blue. "Not a child, in case you haven't noticed, Mother. I am perfectly capable of doing my shopping alone." There was a clucking noise and a voice Harry recognized as that of Madam Mawkin, the owner, said, "Now, dear, your mother's quite right. None of us is supposed to go wandering around on our own anymore. It's nothing to do with being a child. Watch where you're sticking that pin, will you?" A teenage boy with a pale, pointed face and white blonde hair appeared from behind the rack, wearing a handsome set of dark green robes that glittered with pins around the hem and the edges of the sleeves. He strode to the mirror and examined himself. It was a few moments before he noticed Harry, Ron, and Hermione reflected over his shoulder. His light gray eyes narrowed. "If you're wondering what the smell is, Mother, a mudblood just walked in," said Draco Malfoy. "I don't think there's any need for language like that," said Madam Mawkin, scurrying out from behind the clothes rack holding a tape measure and a wand. And I don't want wands drawn in my shop either, she added hastily, for a glance toward the door had shown her Harry and Ron both standing there with their wands out and pointing at Malfoy. Hermione, who was standing slightly behind them, whispered, "No, don't, honestly, it's not worth it." "Yeah, like you dare do magic out of school," sneered Malfoy. "Who blacked your eye, Granger?" "I want to send them flowers." "That's quite enough," said Madame Morkin sharply, looking over her shoulder for support. "Madam, please." Narcissa Malfoy strolled out from behind the clothes rack. "Put those away," she said coldly to Harry and Ron. "If you attack my son again, I shall ensure that it is the last thing you ever do." "Really?" said Harry, taking a step forward and gazing into the smoothly arrogant face that, for all its pallor, still resembled her sister's. He was as tall as she was now. "Going to get a few Death Eater pals to do us in, are you?" Madame Morkin squealed and clutched at her heart. "Really, you shouldn't accuse. Dangerous thing to say. Wands away, please." But Harry did not lower his wand. Narcissa Malfoy smiled unpleasantly. "I see that being Dumbledore's favorite has given you a false sense of security, Harry Potter. But Dumbledore won't always be there to protect you." Harry looked mockingly all around the shop. "Wow, look at that, he's not here now. So why not have a go? They might be able to find you a double cell in Azkaban with your loser of a husband." Malfoy made an angry movement toward Harry, but stumbled over his overlong robe. Ron laughed loudly. "Don't you dare talk to my mother like that, Potter." Malfoy snarled. "It's all right, Draco," said Narcissa, restraining him with her thin white fingers upon his shoulder. "I expect Potter will be reunited with dear Sirius before I am reunited with Lucius." Harry raised his wand higher. "Harry, no," moaned Hermione, grabbing his arm and attempting to push it down by his side. "Think. You mustn't. You'll be in such trouble." Madame Morkin dithered for a moment on the spot, then seemed to decide to act as though nothing was happening in the hope that it wouldn't. She bent toward Malfoy, who was still glaring at Harry. "I think this left sleeve could come up a little bit more, dear, let me just." "Ouch," bellowed Malfoy, slapping her hand away. "Watch where you're putting your pins, woman." "Mother, I don't think I want these anymore." He pulled the robes over his head and threw them onto the floor at Madame Morkin's feet. "You're right, Draco," said Narcissa, with a contemptuous glance at Hermione. "Now I know the kind of scum that shops here. We'll do better at Twilfit and Tattings." And with that, the pair of them strode out of the shop, Malfoy taking care to bang as hard as he could into Ron on the way out. "Well, really," said Madame Morkin, snatching up the fallen robes and moving the tip of her wand over them like a vacuum cleaner, so that it removed all the dust. She was distracted all through the fitting of Ron's and Harry's new robes, tried to sell Hermione wizards' dress robes instead of witches', and when she finally bowed them out of the shop it was with an air of being glad to see the back of them. "Got Evie writhing?" asked Hagrid brightly when they reappeared at his side. "Just about," said Harry. "Did you see the Malfoys?" "Yeah," said Hagrid, unconcerned. "But they wouldn't dare make trouble in the middle o' Diagon Alley, Harry. Don't worry about them." Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged looks, but before they could disabuse Hagrid of this comfortable notion, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley and Ginny appeared, all clutching heavy packages of books. "Everyone all right?" said Mrs. Weasley. "Got your robes?" "Right then, We can pop in at the apothecary and Elop's on the way to Fred and George's. Stick close, now. Neither Harry nor Ron bought any ingredients at the apothecary, seeing that they were no longer studying potions, but both bought large boxes of owl nuts for Hedwig and Pigwidgeon at Elop's Owl Emporium. Then, with Mrs. Weasley checking her watch every minute or so, they headed farther along the street in search of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, the joke shop run by Fred and George. "We really haven't got too long," Mrs. Weasley said. "So we'll just have a quick look around and then back to the car. We must be close, that's number 92, 94. "Whoa," said Ron, stopping in his tracks. Set against the dull, poster-muffled shop fronts around them, Fred and George's windows hit the eye like a firework display. Casual passers-by were looking back over their shoulders at the windows, and a few rather stunned-looking people had actually come to a halt, transfixed. The left-hand window was dazzlingly full of an assortment of goods that revolved, popped, flashed, bounced, and shrieked. Harry's eyes began to water just looking at it. The right-hand window was covered with a gigantic poster, purple like those of the Ministry, but emblazoned with flashing yellow letters. "Why are you worrying about you-know-who? You should be worrying about UNOPOO, the constipation sensation that's gripping the nation." Harry started to laugh. He heard a weak sort of moan beside him and looked around to see Mrs. Weasley gazing, dumbfounded, at the poster. Her lips moved silently, mouthing the name "You-know-poo." "They'll be murdered in their beds," she whispered. "No they won't," said Ron, who, like Harry, was laughing. "This is brilliant." And he and Harry led the way into the shop. It was packed with customers. Harry could not get near the shelves. He stared around, looking up at the boxes piled to the ceiling. Here were the skiving snack boxes that the twins had perfected during their last, unfinished year at Hogwarts. Harry noticed that the nosebleed nougat was most popular, with only one battered box left on the shelf. There were bins full of trick wands, the cheapest merely turning into rubber chickens, or pairs of briefs when waved, the most expensive beating the unwary user around the head and neck, and boxes of quills, which came in self-inking, spell-checking, and smart answer varieties. A space cleared in the crowd, and Harry pushed his way toward the counter, where a gaggle of delighted 10-year-olds was watching a tiny little wooden man slowly ascending the steps to a real set of gallows, both perched on a box that read, "Reusable hangman, spell it, or he'll swing." Patented daydream charms. Hermione had managed to squeeze through to a large display near the counter, and was reading the information on the back of a box bearing a highly colored picture of a handsome youth and a swooning girl who were standing on the deck of a pirate ship. "One simple incantation, and you will enter a top-quality, highly realistic, 30-minute daydream, easy to fit into the average school lesson, and virtually undetectable. Side effects include vacant expression and minor drooling. Not for sale to under 16s. You know," said Hermione, looking up at Harry, "that really is extraordinary magic." "For that, Hermione," said a voice behind them, "you can have one for free." A beaming Fred stood before them, wearing a set of magenta robes that clashed magnificently with his flaming hair. "How are you, Harry?" They shook hands. "And what's happened to your eye, Hermione?" "Your punching telescope," she said ruefully. "Oh blimey, I forgot about those," said Fred. "Here." He pulled a tub out of his pocket and handed it to her. She unscrewed it gingerly to reveal a thick yellow paste. "Just dab it on, that bruise be gone within the hour," said Fred. "We had to find a decent bruise remover. We're testing most of our products on ourselves." Hermione looked nervous. "It is safe, isn't it?" she asked. "Course it is," said Fred bracingly. Come on, Harry, I'll give you a tour. Harry left Hermione dabbing her black eye with paste and followed Fred toward the back of the shop, where he saw a stand of card and rope tricks. Muggle magic tricks, said Fred happily, pointing them out. For freaks like Dad, you know, who love Muggle stuff. It's not a big earner, but we do fairly steady business, they are great novelties. Oh, here's George. Fred's twin shook Harry's hand energetically, giving him the tour. Come through the back, Harry, that's where we're making the real money. Pocket anything, and you'll pay in more than galleons, he added warningly to a small boy who hastily whipped his hand out of the tub labeled, edible dark marks, they'll make anyone sick. George pushed back a curtain beside the Muggle tricks and Harry saw a darker, less crowded room. The packaging on the products lining these shelves was more subdued. We've just developed this more serious line, said Fred. Funny how it happened. You wouldn't believe how many people, even people who work at the ministry, can't do a decent shield charm, said George. Course, they didn't have you teaching them, Harry. That's right. Well, we thought shield hats were a bit of a laugh, you know, challenge your mate to jinx you while wearing it and watch his face when the jinx just bounces off. But the ministry bought 500 for all its support staff. And we're still getting massive orders. So we've expanded into a range of shield cloaks, shield gloves. I mean, they wouldn't help much against the unforgivable curses, but for minor to moderate hexes or jinxes. And then we thought we'd get into the whole area of defense against the dark arts, because it's such a money spinner, continued George enthusiastically. This is cool. Look, instant darkness powder, we're importing it from Peru. Handy if you want to make a quick escape. And our decoy detonators are just walking off the shelves. Look, said Fred, pointing at a number of weird-looking black horn-type objects that were indeed attempting to scurry out of sight. You just drop one surreptitiously, and it'll run off and make a nice loud noise out of sight, giving you a diversion if you need one. Handy, said Harry, impressed. Here, said George, catching a couple and throwing them to Harry. A young witch with short blonde hair poked her head around the curtain. Harry saw that she too was wearing magenta staff robes. There's a customer out here looking for a joke cauldron, Mr. Weasley and Mr. Weasley, she said. Harry found it very odd to hear Fred and George called Mr. Weasley, but they took it in their stride. Right you are, Verity, I'm coming, said George promptly. Harry, you help yourself to anything you want, all right. No charge. I can't do that, said Harry, who had already pulled out his money bag to pay for the decoy detonators. You don't pay here, said Fred firmly, waving away Harry's gold. But you gave us our startup loan, we haven't forgotten, said George sternly. Take whatever you like, and just remember to tell people where you got it, if they ask. George swept off through the curtain to help with the customers, and Fred led Harry back into the main part of the shop to find Hermione and Ginny still poring over the patented Daydream charms. Haven't you girls found our special Wonder Witch products yet? Asked Fred. Follow me, ladies. Near the window was an array of violently pink products around which a cluster of excited girls was giggling enthusiastically. Hermione and Ginny both hung back, looking wary. There you go, said Fred proudly. Best range of love potions you'll find anywhere. Ginny raised an eyebrow skeptically. Do they work? She asked. Certainly they work, for up to 24 hours at a time depending on the weight of the boy in question and the attractiveness of the girl, said George, reappearing suddenly at their side. But we're not selling them to our sister, he added, becoming suddenly stern, not when she's already got about 5 boys on the go from what we've / whatever you've heard from Ron is a big fat lie, said Ginny calmly, leaning forward to take a small pink pot off the shelf. What's this? Guaranteed 10-second pimple vanisher, said Fred. Excellent on everything from boils to blackheads, but don't change the subject. Are you or are you not currently going out with a boy called Dean Thomas? Yes, I am, said Ginny. And last time I looked, he was definitely 1 boy, not 5. What are those? She was pointing at a number of round balls of fluff in shades of pink and purple, all rolling around the bottom of a cage and emitting high-pitched squeaks. Pygmy puffs, said George. Miniature puffskeins, we can't breed them fast enough. So what about Michael Corner? I dumped him, he was a bad loser, said Ginny, putting a finger through the bars of the cage and watching the pygmy puffs crowd around it. They are really cute. They are fairly cuddly, yes, conceded Fred. But you're moving through boyfriends a bit fast, aren't you? Ginny turned to look at him, her hands on her hips. There was such a Mrs. Weasley-ish glare on her face that Harry was surprised Fred didn't recoil. It's none of your business. And I'll thank you, she added angrily to Ron, who had just appeared at George's elbow, laden with merchandise, not to tell tales about me to these 2. That's 3 galleons, 9 sickles, and a canute, said Fred, examining the many boxes in Ron's arms. Cough up. I'm your brother. And that's our stuff you're nicking. 3 galleons, 9 sickles. I'll knock off the canute. But I haven't got 3 galleons, 9 sickles. You'd better put it back then, and mind you put it on the right shelves. Ron dropped several boxes, swore, and made a rude hand gesture at Fred that was unfortunately spotted by Mrs. Weasley, who had chosen that moment to appear. If I see you do that again, I'll jinx your fingers together, she said sharply. Mum, can I have a pygmy puff? Said Ginny at once. What? Said Mrs. Weasley warily. Look, they're so sweet. Mrs. Weasley moved aside to look at the pygmy puffs, and Harry, Ron, and Hermione momentarily had an unimpeded view out of the window. Draco Malfoy was hurrying up the street alone. As he passed Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, he glanced over his shoulder. Seconds later, he moved beyond the scope of the window and they lost sight of him. Wonder where his mummy is, said Harry, frowning. Given her the slip by the looks of it, said Ron. Why, though, said Hermione. Harry said nothing, he was thinking too hard. Narcissa Malfoy would not have let her precious son out of her sight willingly. Malfoy must have made a real effort to free himself from her clutches. Harry, knowing and loathing Malfoy, was sure the reason could not be innocent. He glanced around. Mrs. Weasley and Ginny were bending over the pygmy puffs. Mr. Weasley was delightedly examining a pack of Muggle-marked playing cards. Fred and George were both helping customers. On the other side of the glass, Hagrid was standing with his back to them, looking up and down the street. Get under here, quick, said Harry, pulling his invisibility cloak out of his bag. Oh, I don't know, Harry, said Hermione, looking uncertainly toward Mrs. Weasley. Come on, said Ron. She hesitated for a second longer, then ducked under the cloak with Harry and Ron. Nobody noticed them vanish. They were all too interested in Fred and George's products. Harry, Ron, and Hermione squeezed their way out of the door as quickly as they could, but by the time they gained the street, Malfoy had disappeared just as successfully as they had. He was going in that direction, murmured Harry as quietly as possible, so that the humming Hagrid would not hear them. "Come on." They scurried along, peering left and right, through shop windows and doors, until Hermione pointed ahead. "That's him, isn't it?" she whispered. "Turning left." "Big surprise," whispered Ron. For Malfoy had glanced around, then slid into Knockturn Alley and out of sight. "Quick, or we'll lose him," said Harry, speeding up. "Our feet'll be seen," said Hermione anxiously, as the cloak flapped a little around their ankles. It was much more difficult hiding all three of them under the cloak nowadays. "It doesn't matter," said Harry impatiently. "Just hurry." But Knockturn Alley, the side street devoted to the dark arts, looked completely deserted. They peered into windows as they passed, but none of the shops seemed to have any customers at all. Harry supposed it was a bit of a giveaway in these dangerous and suspicious times to buy dark artifacts, or at least, to be seen buying them. Hermione gave his arm a hard pinch. "Ouch." "Sure. Look. He's in there," she breathed in Harry's ear. They had drawn level with the only shop in Knockturn Alley that Harry had ever visited, Borgin and Burke's, which sold a wide variety of sinister objects. There in the midst of the cases full of skulls and old bottles stood Draco Malfoy with his back to them, just visible beyond the very same large black cabinet, in which Harry had once hidden to avoid Malfoy and his father. Judging by the movements of Malfoy's hands, he was talking animatedly. The proprietor of the shop, Mr. Borgin, an oily-haired, stooping man, stood facing Malfoy. He was wearing a curious expression of mingled resentment and fear. "If only we could hear what they are saying," said Hermione. "We can," said Ron excitedly. "Hang on, damn." He dropped a couple more of the boxes he was still clutching as he fumbled with the largest. "Extendable ears, look." "Fantastic," said Hermione, as Ron unraveled the long, flesh-colored strings and began to feed them toward the bottom of the door. "Oh, I hope the door isn't imperturbable." "No," said Ron gleefully. "Listen." They put their heads together and listened intently to the ends of the strings, through which Malfoy's voice could be heard loud and clear, as though a radio had been turned on. "You know how to fix it?" "Possibly," said Borgin, in a tone that suggested he was unwilling to commit himself. "I'll need to see it, though. Why don't you bring it into the shop?" "I can't," said Malfoy. "It's got to stay put. I just need you to tell me how to do it." Harry saw Borgin lick his lips nervously. "Well, without seeing it, I must say it will be a very difficult job, perhaps impossible. I couldn't guarantee anything." "No," said Malfoy, and Harry knew, just by his tone, that Malfoy was sneering. "Perhaps this will make you more confident." He moved toward Borgin and was blocked from view by the cabinet. Harry, Ron, and Hermione shuffled sideways to try and keep him in sight, but all they could see was Borgin, looking very frightened. "Tell anyone," said Malfoy, "and there will be retribution. You know Fenrir Greyback. He's a family friend. He'll be dropping in from time to make sure you're giving the problem your full attention." "There will be no need for, I'll decide that," said Malfoy. "Well, I'd better be off. And don't forget to keep that one safe, I'll need it. Perhaps you'd like to take it now." "No, of course I wouldn't, you stupid little man. How would I look carrying that down the street?" "Just don't sell it." "Of course not, sir." Borgin made a bow as deep as the one Harry had once seen him give Lucius Malfoy. "Not a word to anyone, Borgin, and that includes my mother, understand?" Naturally," murmured Borgin, bowing again. Next moment, the bell over the door tinkled loudly as Malfoy stalked out of the shop looking very pleased with himself. He passed so close to Harry, Ron, and Hermione that they felt the cloak flutter around their knees again. Inside the shop, Borgin remained frozen, his unctuous smile had vanished, he looked worried. "What was that about?" whispered Ron, reeling in the extendable ears. "Dunno," said Harry, thinking hard. "He wants something mended, and he wants to reserve something in there." "Could you see what he pointed at when he said that one?" "No, he was behind that cabinet. You two stay here," whispered Hermione. "What are you?" But Hermione had already ducked out from under the cloak. She checked her hair in the reflection in the glass, then marched into the shop, setting the bell tinkling again. Ron hastily fed the extendable ears back under the door, and passed one of the strings to Harry. "Hello, horrible morning, isn't it?" Hermione said brightly to Borgin, who did not answer, but cast her a suspicious look. Humming cheerily, Hermione strolled through the jumble of objects on display. "Is this necklace for sale?" she asked, pausing beside a glass-fronted case. "If you've got 1,500 galleons," said Mr. Borgin coldly. "Oh no, I haven't got quite that much," said Hermione, walking on. "And, what about this lovely skull?" 16 galleons. "So it's for sale, then?" "It isn't being kept for anyone." Mr. Borgin squinted at her. Harry had the nasty feeling he knew exactly what Hermione was up to. Apparently Hermione felt she had been rumbled too, because she suddenly threw caution to the winds. "The thing is, that a boy who was in here just now, Draco Malfoy, well, he's a friend of mine, and I want to get him a birthday present, but if he's already reserved anything, I obviously don't want to get him the same thing, so, It was a pretty lame story in Harry's opinion, and apparently Borgin thought so too. "Out," he said sharply. "Get out." Hermione did not wait to be asked twice, but hurried to the door with Borgin at her heels. As the bell tinkled again, Borgin slammed the door behind her and put up the closed sign. "Ah well," said Ron, throwing the cloak back over Hermione. "Worth a try, but you were a bit obvious. Well, next time you can show me how it's done, Master of Mystery," she snapped. Ron and Hermione bickered all the way back to Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, where they were forced to stop so that they could dodge undetected around a very anxious-looking Mrs. Weasley and Hagrid, who had clearly noticed their absence. Once in the shop, Harry whipped off the invisibility cloak, hid it in his bag, and joined in with the other two when they insisted, in answer to Mrs. Weasley's accusations, that they had been in the back room all along, and that she could not have looked properly. Chapter 7: The Slug Club. Harry spent a lot of the last week of the holidays pondering the meaning of Malfoy's behavior in Knockturn Alley. What disturbed him most was the satisfied look on Malfoy's face as he had left the shop. Nothing that made Malfoy look that happy could be good news. To his slight annoyance, however, neither Ron nor Hermione seemed quite as curious about Malfoy's activities as he was. Or at least, they seemed to get bored of discussing it after a few days. "Yes, I've already agreed it was fishy, Harry," said Hermione a little impatiently. She was sitting on the windowsill in Fred and George's room, with her feet up on one of the cardboard boxes, and had only grudgingly looked up from her new copy of Advanced Rune Translation. "But haven't we agreed there could be a lot of explanations?" "Maybe he's broken his hand of glory," said Ron vaguely, as he attempted to straighten his broomstick's bent tail twigs. "Remember that shriveled-up arm Malfoy had? But what about when he said, 'Don't forget to keep that one safe,' asked Harry for the umpteenth time. That sounded to me like Borgin's got another one of the broken objects, and Malfoy wants both. You reckon, said Ron, now trying to scrape some dirt off his broom handle. Yeah, I do, said Harry. When neither Ron nor Hermione answered, he said, Malfoy's father's in Azkaban. Don't you think Malfoy'd like revenge? Ron looked up, blinking. Malfoy, revenge. What can he do about it? That's my point, I don't know, said Harry, frustrated. But he's up to something and I think we should take it seriously. His father's a Death Eater, and Harry broke off, his eyes fixed on the window behind Hermione, his mouth open. A startling thought had just occurred to him. Harry, said Hermione in an anxious voice. What's wrong? Your scar's not hurting again, is it? Asked Ron nervously. He's a Death Eater, said Harry slowly. He's replaced his father as a Death Eater. There was a silence, then Ron erupted in laughter. Malfoy. He's 16, Harry. You think you know who would let Malfoy join? It seems very unlikely, Harry, said Hermione in a repressive sort of voice. What makes you think? In Madame Malkin's. She didn't touch him, but he yelled and jerked his arm away from her when she went to roll up his sleeve. It was his left arm. He's been branded with the dark mark. Ron and Hermione looked at each other. Well, said Ron, sounding thoroughly unconvinced. I think he just wanted to get out of there, Harry, said Hermione. He showed Borgin something we couldn't see, Harry pressed on stubbornly. Something that seriously scared Borgin. It was the mark. I know it. He was showing Borgin, who he was dealing with. You saw how seriously Borgin took him. Ron and Hermione exchanged another look. I'm not sure, Harry. Yeah, I still don't reckon you know who would let Malfoy join. Annoyed, but absolutely convinced he was right, Harry snatched up a pile of filthy Quidditch robes and left the room. Mrs. Weasley had been urging them for days not to leave their washing and packing until the last moment. On the landing he bumped into Ginny, who was returning to her room carrying a pile of freshly laundered clothes. I wouldn't go in the kitchen just now, she warned him. There's a lot of phlegm around. I'll be careful not to slip in it. Harry smiled. Sure enough, when he entered the kitchen it was to find Fleur sitting at the kitchen table, in full flow about plans for her wedding to Bill, while Mrs. Weasley kept watch over a pile of self-peeling sprouts, looking bad-tempered. Bill and I've almost decided on only 2 bridesmaids. Ginny and Gabrielle will look very sweet together. I am thinking of dressing them in pale gold pink, would of course be horrible with Ginny's hair. Ah, Harry, said Mrs. Weasley loudly, cutting across Fleur's monologue. Good. I wanted to explain about the security arrangements for the journey to Hogwarts tomorrow. We've got ministry cars again, and there will be Auras waiting at the station. Is Tonks going to be there? Asked Harry, handing over his Quidditch things. No, I don't think so. She's been stationed somewhere else from what Arthur said. She has let Elf go, Zat Tonks, Fleur mused, examining her own stunning reflection in the back of a teaspoon. A big mistake if you ask. Yes, thank you, said Mrs. Weasley tartly, cutting across Fleur again. You'd better get on, Harry. I want the trunks ready tonight, if possible, so we don't have the usual last-minute scramble. And in fact, their departure the following morning was smoother than usual. The ministry cars glided up to the front of the burrow to find them waiting, trunks packed, Hermione's cat, Crookshanks, safely enclosed in his traveling basket, and Hedwig, Ron's owl, Pigwidgeon, and Ginny's new purple pygmy puff, Arnold, in cages. Au revoir, Ari, said Fleur throatily, kissing him goodbye. Ron hurried forward, looking hopeful, but Ginny stuck out her foot and Ron fell, sprawling in the dust at Fleur's feet. Furious, red-faced, and dirt-spattered, he hurried into the car without saying goodbye. There was no cheerful Hagrid waiting for them at King's Cross Station. Instead, two grim-faced, bearded Aurors in dark Muggle suits moved forward the moment the car stopped, and, flanking the party, marched them into the station without speaking. "Quick, quick, through the barrier," said Mrs. Weasley, who seemed a little flustered by this austere efficiency. Harry had better go first, she looked inquiringly at one of the Aurors, who nodded briefly, seized Harry's upper arm, and attempted to steer him toward the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. "I can walk, thanks," said Harry irritably, jerking his arm out of the Auror's grip. He pushed his trolley directly at the solid barrier, ignoring his silent companion, and found himself, a second later, standing on platform 9 3/4, where the Scarlet Hogwarts Express stood belching steam over the crowd. Hermione and the Weasleys joined him within seconds. Without waiting to consult his grim-faced Auror, Harry motioned to Ron and Hermione to follow him up the platform, looking for an empty compartment. "We can't, Harry," said Hermione, looking apologetic. "Ron and I've got to go to the prefect's carriage first, and then patrol the corridors for a bit." "Oh yeah, I forgot," said Harry. "You'd better get straight on the train, all of you. You've only got a few minutes to go," said Mrs. Weasley, consulting her watch. "Well, have a lovely term, Ron." "Mr. Weasley, can I have a quick word?" said Harry, making up his mind on the spur of the moment. "Of course," said Mr. Weasley, who looked slightly surprised, but followed Harry out of earshot of the others nevertheless. Harry had thought it through carefully and come to the conclusion that, if he was to tell anyone, Mr. Weasley was the right person, firstly, because he worked at the Ministry and was therefore in the best position to make further investigations, and secondly, because he thought that there was not too much risk of Mr. Weasley exploding with anger. He could see Mrs. Weasley and the grim-faced Auror casting the pair of them suspicious looks as they moved away. "When we were in Diagon Alley," Harry began, but Mr. Weasley forestalled him with a grimace. "Am I about to discover where you, Ron, and Hermione disappeared to while you were supposed to be in the back room of Fred and George's shop? How did you?" "Harry, please. You're talking to the man who raised Fred and George." Yeah, all right, we weren't in the back room." "Very well, then, let's hear the worst." "Well, we followed Draco Malfoy. We used my invisibility cloak." "Did you have any particular reason for doing so, or was it a mere whim?" "Because I thought Malfoy was up to something," said Harry, disregarding Mr. Weasley's look of mingled exasperation and amusement. "He'd given his mother the slip, and I wanted to know why." "Of course you did," said Mr. Weasley, sounding resigned. "Well, did you find out why?" "He went into Borgin and Burke's," said Harry, "and started bullying the bloke in there, Borgin, to help him fix something. And he said he wanted Borgin to keep something else for him. He made it sound like it was the same kind of thing that needed fixing. Like they were a pair. And..." Harry took a deep breath. "There's something else. We saw Malfoy jump about a mile when Madame Morkan tried to touch his left arm. I think he's been branded with the Dark Mark. I think he's replaced his father as a Death Eater." Mr. Weasley looked taken aback. After a moment he said, "Harry, I doubt whether you know who would allow a 16-year-old. Does anyone really know what you know who would or wouldn't do? Asked Harry angrily. Mr. Weasley, I'm sorry, but isn't it worth investigating? If Malfoy wants something fixing, and he needs to threaten Borgin to get it done, it's probably something dark or dangerous, isn't it? I doubt it, to be honest, Harry, said Mr. Weasley slowly. You see, when Lucius Malfoy was arrested, we raided his house. We took away everything that might have been dangerous. I think you missed something, said Harry stubbornly. Well, maybe, said Mr. Weasley, but Harry could tell that Mr. Weasley was humoring him. There was a whistle behind them. Nearly everyone had boarded the train and the doors were closing. You'd better hurry, said Mr. Weasley, as Mrs. Weasley cried, Harry, quickly. He hurried forward and Mr. and Mrs. Weasley helped him load his trunk onto the train. Now, dear, you're coming to us for Christmas. It's all fixed with Dumbledore. So we'll see you quite soon, said Mrs. Weasley through the window, as Harry slammed the door shut behind him and the train began to move. You make sure you look after yourself and... The train was gathering speed. Be good, and she was jogging to keep up now. Stay safe. Harry waved until the train had turned a corner and Mr. and Mrs. Weasley were lost to view, then turned to see where the others had got to. He supposed Ron and Hermione were cloistered in the prefect's carriage, but Ginny was a little way along the corridor, chatting to some friends. He made his way toward her, dragging his trunk. People stared shamelessly as he approached. They even pressed their faces against the windows of their compartments to get a look at him. He had expected an upswing in the amount of gaping and gawping he would have to endure this term, after all the chosen one rumors in the Daily Prophet, but he did not enjoy the sensation of standing in a very bright spotlight. He tapped Ginny on the shoulder. Fancy trying to find a compartment. I can't, Harry. I said I'd meet Dean, said Ginny brightly. See you later. Right, said Harry. He felt a strange twinge of annoyance as she walked away, her long red hair dancing behind her. He had become so used to her presence over the summer that he had almost forgotten that Ginny did not hang around with him, Ron, and Hermione while at school. Then he blinked and looked around. He was surrounded by mesmerized girls. Hi, Harry, said a familiar voice from behind him. Neville, said Harry in relief, turning to see a round-faced boy struggling toward him. Hello, Harry, said a girl with long hair and large misty eyes, who was just behind Neville. Luna, hi, how are you? Very well, thank you, said Luna. She was clutching a magazine to her chest. Large letters on the front announced that there was a pair of free spectrospecs inside. The quibble is still going strong, then, asked Harry, who felt a certain fondness for the magazine, having given it an exclusive interview the previous year. Oh yes, circulation's well up, said Luna happily. Let's find seats, said Harry, and the three of them set off along the train through hordes of silently staring students. At last they found an empty compartment, and Harry hurried inside gratefully. They're even staring at us, said Neville, indicating himself and Luna. Because we're with you. They are staring at you because you were at the ministry too, said Harry, as he hoisted his trunk into the luggage rack. Our little adventure there was all over the Daily Prophet, you must have seen it. Yes, I thought Gran would be angry about all the publicity, said Neville, but she was really pleased. Says I'm starting to live up to my dad at long last. She bought me a new wand, look. He pulled it out and showed it to Harry. Cherry and unicorn hair, he said proudly. We think it was one of the last Ollivander ever sold. He vanished next day. Oi. Come back here, Trevor. And he dived under the seat to retrieve his toad as it made one of its frequent bids for freedom. Are we still doing D.A. meetings this year, Harry? Asked Luna, who was detaching a pair of psychedelic spectacles from the middle of the quibbler. No point now, we've got rid of Umbridge, is there? Said Harry, sitting down. Neville bumped his head against the seat as he emerged from under it. He looked most disappointed. I liked the D.A. I learned loads with you. I enjoyed the meetings too, said Luna serenely. It was like having friends. This was one of those uncomfortable things Luna often said, and which made Harry feel a squirming mixture of pity and embarrassment. Before he could respond, however, there was a disturbance outside their compartment door. A group of fourth-year girls was whispering and giggling together on the other side of the glass. You ask him? No, you. I'll do it. And one of them, a bold-looking girl with large dark eyes, a prominent chin, and long black hair, pushed her way through the door. Hi, Harry. I'm Romilda Vane, she said loudly and confidently. Why don't you join us in our compartment? You don't have to sit with them, she added in a stage whisper, indicating Neville's bottom, which was sticking out from under the seat again as he groped around for Trevor, and Luna, who was now wearing her free spectrospecs, which gave her the look of a demented, multicolored owl. They are friends of mine, said Harry coldly. Oh, said the girl, looking very surprised. Oh? Okay. And she withdrew, sliding the door closed behind her. People expect you to have cooler friends than us, said Luna, once again displaying her knack for embarrassing honesty. You are cool, said Harry shortly. None of them was at the ministry. They didn't fight with me. That's a very nice thing to say, beamed Luna. Then she pushed her spectrospecs farther up her nose and settled down to read the quibbler. We didn't face him, though, said Neville, emerging from under the seat with fluff and dust in his hair and a resigned-looking Trevor in his hand. You did. You should hear my grand talk about you. That Harry Potter's got more backbone than the whole Ministry of Magic put together. She'd give anything to have you as a grandson. Harry laughed uncomfortably and changed the subject to O.W.L. results as soon as he could. While Neville recited his grades and wondered aloud whether he would be allowed to take a Transfiguration N.E.W.T. with only an acceptable, Harry watched him without really listening. Neville's childhood had been blighted by Voldemort just as much as Harry's had, but Neville had no idea how close he had come to having Harry's destiny. The prophecy could have referred to either of them, yet, for his own inscrutable reasons, Voldemort had chosen to believe that Harry was the one meant. Had Voldemort chosen Neville, it would be Neville sitting opposite Harry bearing the lightning-shaped scar and the weight of the prophecy, or would it? Would Neville's mother have died to save him, as Lily had died for Harry? Surely she would. But what if she had been unable to stand between her son and Voldemort? Would there then have been no chosen one at all? An empty seat, where Neville now sat, and a scarless Harry, who would have been kissed goodbye by his own mother, not Ron's. You all right, Harry? You look funny, said Neville. Harry started. Sorry Raxpert got you, asked Luna sympathetically, peering at Harry through her enormous colored spectacles. I what? A Raxpert? They are invisible. They float in through your ears and make your brain go fuzzy, she said. I thought I felt one zooming around in here. She flapped her hands at thin air, as though beating off large invisible moths. Harry and Neville caught each other's eyes and hastily began to talk of Quidditch. The weather beyond the train windows was as patchy as it had been all summer. They passed through stretches of the chilling mist, then out into weak, clear sunlight. It was during one of the clear spells, when the sun was visible almost directly overhead, that Ron and Hermione entered the compartment at last. "Wish the lunch trolley would hurry up. I'm starving," said Ron longingly, slumping into the seat beside Harry and rubbing his stomach. "Hi, Neville." "Hi, Luna. Guess what?" he added, turning to Harry. "Malfoy's not doing prefect duty. He's just sitting in his compartment with the other Slytherins. We saw him when we passed." Harry sat up straight, interested. It was not like Malfoy to pass up the chance to demonstrate his power as prefect, which he had happily abused all the previous year. "What did he do when he saw you?" "The usual," said Ron indifferently, demonstrating a rude hand gesture. "Not like him, though, is it?" "Well, that is, he did the hand gesture again, but why isn't he out there bullying first years?" "Dunno," said Harry, but his mind was racing. Didn't this look as though Malfoy had more important things on his mind than bullying younger students? "Maybe he preferred the inquisitorial squad," said Hermione. "Maybe being a prefect seems a bit tame after that." "I don't think so," said Harry. "I think his," but before he could expound on his theory, the compartment door slid open again, and a breathless third-year girl stepped inside. "I'm supposed to deliver these to Neville Longbottom and Harry P. Potter," she faltered, as her eyes met Harry's and she turned scarlet. She was holding out 2 scrolls of parchment tied with violet ribbon. Perplexed, Harry and Neville took the scroll addressed to each of them and the girl stumbled back out of the compartment. "What is it?" Ron demanded, as Harry unrolled his. "An invitation," said Harry. "Harry, I would be delighted if you would join me for a bite of lunch in compartment C. Sincerely, Professor H.E.F. Slughorn." "Who's Professor Slughorn?" asked Neville, looked perplexedly at his own invitation. "New teacher," said Harry. "Well, I suppose we'll have to go, won't we?" "But what does he want me for?" asked Neville nervously, as though he was expecting detention. "No idea," said Harry, which was not entirely true, though he had no proof yet that his hunch was correct. "Listen," he added, seized by a sudden brain wave, "let's go under the invisibility cloak, then we might get a good look at Malfoy on the way, see what he's up to." This idea, however, came to nothing. The corridors, which were packed with people on the lookout for the lunch trolley, were impossible to negotiate while wearing the cloak. Harry stowed it regretfully back in his bag, reflecting that it would have been nice to wear it just to avoid all the staring, which seemed to have increased in intensity even since he had last walked down the train. Every now and then, students would hurtle out of their compartments to get a better look at him. The exception was Cho Chang, who darted into her compartment when she saw Harry coming. As Harry passed the window, he saw her deep in determined conversation with her friend Marietta, who was wearing a very thick layer of makeup that did not entirely obscure the odd formation of pimples still etched across her face. Smirking slightly, Harry pushed on. When they reached compartment C, they saw at once that they were not Slughorn's only invitees, although judging by the enthusiasm of Slughorn's welcome, Harry was the most warmly anticipated. "Harry, boy," said Slughorn, jumping up at the sight of him so that his great velvet-covered belly seemed to fill all the remaining space in the compartment. His shiny bald head and great silvery mustache gleamed as brightly in the sunlight as the golden buttons on his waistcoat. "Good to see you, good to see you. And you must be Mr. Longbottom." Neville nodded, looking scared. At a gesture from Slughorn, they sat down opposite each other in the only two empty seats, which were nearest the door. Harry glanced around at their fellow guests. He recognized a Slytherin from their year, a tall black boy with high cheekbones and long, slanting eyes. There were also two seventh-year boys Harry did not know, and, squashed in the corner beside Slughorn, and looking as though she was not entirely sure how she had got there, Ginny. "Now, do you know everyone?" Slughorn asked Harry and Neville. "Blaise Zabini is in your year." Of course, Zabini did not make any sign of recognition or greeting, nor did Harry or Neville. Gryffindor and Slytherin students loathed each other on principle. "This is Cormac McLaggen. Perhaps you've come across each other." "No." McLaggen, a large, wiry-haired youth, raised a hand, and Harry and Neville nodded back at him. "And this is Marcus Belby. I don't know whether." Belby, who was thin and nervous-looking, gave a strained smile. "And this charming young lady tells me she knows you." Slughorn finished. Ginny grimaced at Harry and Neville from behind Slughorn's back. "Well now, this is most pleasant," said Slughorn cozily. "A chance to get to know you all a little better. Here, take a napkin. I've packed my own lunch. The trolley, as I remember it, is heavy on licorice wands, and a poor old man's digestive system isn't quite up to such things." "Pheasant, Belby." Belby started, and accepted what looked like half a cold pheasant. "I was just telling young Marcus here that I had the pleasure of teaching his Uncle Damocles," Slughorn told Harry and Neville, now passing around a basket of rolls. "Outstanding wizard, outstanding, and his Order of Merlin most well deserved. Do you see much of your uncle, Marcus?" Unfortunately, Baby had just taken a large mouthful of pheasant. In his haste to answer Slughorn, he swallowed too fast, turned purple, and began to choke. "Anapneo," said Slughorn calmly, pointing his wand at Belby, whose airway seemed to clear at once. Not much of him, no," gasped Belby, his eyes streaming. "Well, of course, I dare say he's busy," said Slughorn, looking questioningly at Belby. "I doubt he invented the wolfsbane potion without considerable hard work." "I suppose," said Belby, who seemed afraid to take another bite of pheasant until he was sure that Slughorn had finished with him. He and my dad don't get on very well, you see, so I don't really know much about." His voice tailed away, as Slughorn gave him a cold smile, and turned to McLaggen instead. "Now, you, Cormac," said Slughorn, "I happen to know you see a lot of your Uncle Tiberius, because he has a rather splendid picture of the two of you hunting nogtails in, I think, Norfolk." "Oh yeah, that was fun, that was," said McLaggen. "We went with Bertie Higgs and Rufus Scrimger. This was before he became minister, obviously. You know Bertie and Rufus too," beamed Slughorn, now offering around a small tray of pies. Somehow, Belby was missed out. "Now tell me." It was as Harry had suspected. Everyone here seemed to have been invited, because they were connected to somebody well-known or influential, everyone except Ginny. Zabini, who was interrogated after McLaggen, turned out to have a famously beautiful witch for a mother, from what Harry could make out. She had been married 7 times, each of her husbands dying mysteriously and leaving her mounds of gold. It was Neville's turn next. This was a very uncomfortable 10 minutes, for Neville's parents, well-known auras, had been tortured into insanity by Bellatrix Lestrange and a couple of Death Eater cronies. At the end of Neville's interview, Harry had the impression that Slughorn was reserving judgment on Neville, yet to see whether he had any of his parents' flair. "And now," said Slughorn, shifting massively in his seat with the air of a compere introducing his star act. "Harry Potter. Where to begin? I feel I barely scratched the surface when we met over the summer." He contemplated Harry for a moment as though he was a particularly large and succulent piece of pheasant, then said, "The chosen one, they are calling you now." Harry said nothing. Belby, McLaggen, and Zabini were all staring at him. "Of course," said Slughorn, watching Harry closely, "there have been rumors for years. I remember when well after that terrible night Lilla James, and you survived, and the word was that you must have powers beyond the ordinary." Zabini gave a tiny little cough that was clearly supposed to indicate amused skepticism. An angry voice burst out from behind Slughorn. "Yeah, Zabini, because you're so talented at posing." "Oh dear," chuckled Slughorn comfortably, looking around at Ginny, who was glaring at Zabini around Slughorn's great belly. "You want to be careful, Blaze. I saw this young lady perform the most marvelous bat bogey hex as I was passing her carriage. I wouldn't cross her." Zabini merely looked contemptuous. "Anyway," said Slughorn, turning back to Harry. "Such rumors this summer. Of course, one doesn't know what to believe. The Prophet has been known to print inaccuracies, make mistakes, but there seems little doubt, given the number of witnesses, that there was quite a disturbance at the ministry, and that you were there in the thick of it all." Harry, who could not see any way out of this without flatly lying, nodded but still said nothing. Slughorn beamed at him. So modest, no wonder Dumbledore is so fond you were there, then. But the rest of the story so sensational, of course, one doesn't know quite what to believe. This fabled prophecy, for instance, we never heard a prophecy, said Neville, turning geranium pink as he said it. "That's right," said Ginny staunchly. "Neville and I were both there too, and all this chosen one rubbish is just the Prophet making things up as usual." "You were both there too, were you?" said Slughorn with great interest, looking from Ginny to Neville, but both of them sat clam-like before his encouraging smile. "Yes, well, it is true that the Prophet often exaggerates, of course," Slughorn said, sounding a little disappointed. "I remember dear Gwenog telling me, Gwenog Jones, I mean, of course, captain of the Holyhead Harpies." He meandered off into a long-winded reminiscence, but Harry had the distinct impression that Slughorn had not finished with him, and that he had not been convinced by Neville and Ginny. The afternoon wore on with more anecdotes about illustrious wizards Slughorn had taught, all of whom had been delighted to join what he called the Slug Club at Hogwarts. Harry could not wait to leave, but couldn't see how to do so politely. Finally the train emerged from yet another long misty stretch into a red sunset, and Slughorn looked around, blinking in the twilight. "Good gracious, it's getting dark already. I didn't notice that they'd lit the lamps. You'd better go and change into your robes, all of you. McLaggen, you must drop by and borrow that book on Nogtails. Harry, Blaze, any time you're passing. Same goes for you, miss," he twinkled at Ginny. "Well, off you go, off you go." As he pushed past Harry into the darkening corridor, Zabini shot him a filthy look that Harry returned with interest. He, Ginny, and Neville followed Zabini back along the train. "I'm glad that's over," muttered Neville. "Strange man, isn't he?" "Yeah, he is a bit," said Harry, his eyes on Zabini. "How come you ended up in there, Ginny?" "He saw me hex Zacharias Smith," said Ginny. You remember that idiot from Hufflepuff who was in the D.A.? He kept on and on asking about what happened at the ministry, and in the end he annoyed me so much I hexed him when Slughorn came in. I thought I was going to got detention, but he just thought it was a really good hex, and invited me to lunch. Mad, eh? Better reason for inviting someone than because their mother's famous, said Harry, scowling at the back of Zabini's head, or because they're uncle. But he broke off. An idea had just occurred to him, a reckless, but potentially wonderful idea. In a minute's time, Zabini was going to re-enter the Slytherin sixth-year compartment and Malfoy would be sitting there, thinking himself unheard by anybody except fellow Slytherins. If Harry could only enter, unseen, behind him, what might he not see or hear? True, there was little of the journey left. Hogsmeade Station had to be less than half an hour away, judging by the wildness of the scenery flashing by the windows, but nobody else seemed prepared to take Harry's suspicions seriously. So it was down to him to prove them. "I'll see you two later," said Harry under his breath, pulling out his invisibility cloak and flinging it over himself. "But what are you?" asked Neville. "Later," whispered Harry, darting after Zabini as quietly as possible, though the rattling of the train made such caution almost pointless. The corridors were almost completely empty now. Nearly everyone had returned to their carriages to change into their school robes and pack up their possessions. Though he was as close as he could get to Zabini without touching him, Harry was not quick enough to slip into the compartment when Zabini opened the door. Zabini was already sliding it shut, when Harry hastily stuck out his foot to prevent it closing. "What's wrong with this thing?" said Zabini angrily, as he smashed the sliding door repeatedly into Harry's foot. Harry seized the door and pushed it open, hard. Zabini, still clinging onto the handle, toppled over sideways into Gregory Goyle's lap, and in the ensuing ruckus, Harry darted into the compartment, leapt onto Zabini's temporarily empty seat, and hoisted himself up into the luggage rack. It was fortunate that Goyle and Zabini were snarling at each other, drawing all eyes onto them, for Harry was quite sure his feet and ankles had been revealed as the cloak had flapped around them. Indeed, for one horrible moment he thought he saw Malfoy's eyes follow his trainer as it whipped upward out of sight. But then Goyle slammed the door shut and flung Zabini off him. Zabini collapsed into his own seat looking ruffled. Vincent Crabbe returned to his comic, and Malfoy, sniggering, lay back down across 2 seats, with his head in Pansy Parkinson's lap. Harry lay curled uncomfortably under the cloak to ensure that every inch of him remained hidden, and watched Pansy stroke the sleek blonde hair off Malfoy's forehead, smirking as she did so, as though anyone would have loved to have been in her place. The lanterns swinging from the carriage ceiling cast a bright light over the scene. Harry could read every word of Crabbe's comic directly below him. "So, Zabini," said Malfoy, "what did Slughorn want?" "Just trying to make up to well-connected people," said Zabini, who was still glowering at Goyle. Not that he managed to find many. This information did not seem to please Malfoy. "Who else had he invited?" he demanded. "McLaggen from Gryffindor," said Zabini. "Oh yeah, his uncle's big in the ministry," said Malfoy. "Someone else called Belby, from Ravenclaw." "Not him, he's a prat," said Pansy. "And Longbottom, Potter, and that Weasley girl," finished Zabini. Malfoy sat up very suddenly, knocking Pansy's hand aside. "He invited Longbottom." "Well, I assume so, as Longbottom was there," said Zabini indifferently. "What's Longbottom got to interest Slughorn?" Zabini shrugged. "Potter, precious Potter, obviously he wanted a look at the chosen one," sneered Malfoy, "but that Weasley girl. What's so special about her?" A lot of boys like her, said Pansy, watching Malfoy out of the corner of her eyes for his reaction. Even you think she's good-looking, don't you, Blaise, and we all know how hard you are to please. I wouldn't touch a filthy little blood traitor like her whatever she looked like, said Zabini coldly, and Pansy looked pleased. Malfoy sank back across her lap and allowed her to resume the stroking of his hair. Well, I pity Slughorn's taste. Maybe he's going a bit senile. Shame, my father always said he was a good wizard in his day. My father used to be a bit of a favorite of his. Slughorn probably hasn't heard I'm on the train, or I wouldn't bank on an invitation, said Zabini. He asked me about Not's father when I first arrived. They used to be old friends, apparently, but when he heard he'd been caught at the ministry he didn't look happy, and Not didn't get an invitation, did he? I don't think Slughorn's interested in Death Eaters. Malfoy looked angry, but forced out a singularly humorless laugh. Well, who cares what he's interested in? What is he, when you come down to it? Just some stupid teacher. Malfoy yawned ostentatiously. I mean, I might not even be at Hogwarts next year. What's it matter to me if some fat old has-been likes me or not? What do you mean, you might not be at Hogwarts next year? Said Pansy indignantly, ceasing grooming Malfoy at once. Well, you never know, said Malfoy with the ghost of a smirk. I might have moved on to bigger and better things. Crouched in the luggage rack under his cloak, Harry's heart began to race. What would Ron and Hermione say about this? Crabbe and Goyle were gawping at Malfoy. Apparently, they had had no inkling of any plans to move on to bigger and better things. Even Zabini had allowed a look of curiosity to mar his haughty features. Pansy resumed the slow stroking of Malfoy's hair, looking dumbfounded. Do you mean him? Malfoy shrugged. Mother wants me to complete my education, but personally, I don't see it as that important these days. I mean, think about it. When the Dark Lord takes over, is he going to care how many O, W, L, S or N, E, W, T, S anyone's got? Of course he isn't. It'll be all about the kind of service he received, the level of devotion he was shown. And you think you'll be able to do something for him? Asked Zabini scathingly. 16 years old and not even fully qualified yet. I've just said, haven't I? Maybe he doesn't care if I'm qualified. Maybe the job he wants me to do isn't something that you need to be qualified for, said Malfoy quietly. Crabbe and Goyle were both sitting with their mouths open like gargoyles. Pansy was gazing down at Malfoy, as though she had never seen anything so awe-inspiring. I can see Hogwarts, said Malfoy, clearly relishing the effect he had created as he pointed out of the blackened window. We'd better get our robes on. Harry was so busy staring at Malfoy, he did not notice Goyle reaching up for his trunk. As he swung it down, it hit Harry hard on the side of the head. He let out an involuntary gasp of pain, and Malfoy looked up at the luggage rack, frowning. Harry was not afraid of Malfoy, but he still did not much like the idea of being discovered hiding under his invisibility cloak by a group of unfriendly Slytherins. Eyes still watering and head still throbbing, he drew his wand, careful not to disarrange the cloak, and waited, breath held. To his relief, Malfoy seemed to decide that he had imagined the noise. He pulled on his robes like the others, locked his trunk, and as the train slowed to a jerky crawl, fastened a thick new traveling cloak round his neck. Harry could see the corridors filling up again, and hoped that Hermione and Ron would take his things out onto the platform for him. He was stuck where he was until the compartment had quite emptied. At last, with a final lurch, the train came to a complete halt. Goyle threw the door open and muscled his way out into a crowd of second years, punching them aside. Crabbe and Zabini followed. "You go on," Malfoy told Pansy, who was waiting for him with her hand held out as though hoping he would hold it. "I just want to check something." Pansy left. Now Harry and Malfoy were alone in the compartment. People were filing past, descending onto the dark platform. Malfoy moved over to the compartment door and let down the blinds, so that people in the corridor beyond could not peer in. He then bent down over his trunk and opened it again. Harry peered down over the edge of the luggage rack, his heart pumping a little faster. What had Malfoy wanted to hide from Pansy? Was he about to see the mysterious broken object it was so important to mend? Petrificus totalis. Without warning, Malfoy pointed his wand at Harry, who was instantly paralyzed. As though in slow motion, he toppled out of the luggage rack and fell, with an agonizing, floor-shaking crash, at Malfoy's feet, the invisibility cloak trapped beneath him, his whole body revealed with his legs still curled absurdly into the cramped kneeling position. He couldn't move a muscle, he could only gaze up at Malfoy, who smiled broadly. "I thought so," he said jubilantly. "I heard Goyle's trunk hit you. And I thought I saw something white flash through the air after Zabini came back." His eyes lingered for a moment upon Harry's trainers. "That was you blocking the door when Zabini came back in, I suppose." He considered Harry a moment. "You didn't hear anything I care about, Potter. But while I've got you here..." And he stamped, hard, on Harry's face. Harry felt his nose break, blood spurted everywhere. "That's from my father. Now, let's see." Malfoy dragged the cloak out from under Harry's immobilized body, and threw it over him. "I don't reckon they'll find you till the train's back in London," he said quietly. "See you around, Potter, or not." And taking care to tread on Harry's fingers, Malfoy left the compartment. Chapter 8, Snape Victorious. Harry could not move a muscle. He lay there beneath the invisibility cloak feeling the blood from his nose flow, hot and wet, over his face, listening to the voices and footsteps in the corridor beyond. His immediate thought was that someone, surely, would check the compartments before the train departed again. But at once came the dispiriting realization that even if somebody looked into the compartment, he would be neither seen nor heard. His best hope was that somebody else would walk in and step on him. Harry had never hated Malfoy more than as he lay there, like an absurd turtle on its back, blood dripping sickeningly into his open mouth. What a stupid situation to have landed himself in, and now the last few footsteps were dying away. Everyone was shuffling along the dark platform outside. He could hear the scraping of trunks, and the loud babble of talk. Ron and Hermione would think that he had left the train without them. Once they arrived at Hogwarts and took their places in the Great Hall, looked up and down the Gryffindor table a few times and finally realized that he was not there, he, no doubt, would be halfway back to London. He tried to make a sound, even a grunt, but it was impossible. Then he remembered that some wizards, like Dumbledore, could perform spells without speaking, so he tried to summon his wand, which had fallen out of his hand, by saying the words Accio wand over and over again in his head. But nothing happened. He thought he could hear the rustling of the trees that surrounded the lake, and the far-off hoot of an owl, but no hint of a search being made, or even, he despised himself slightly for hoping it, panicked voices wondering where Harry Potter had gone. A feeling of hopelessness spread through him as he imagined the convoy of thestral-drawn carriages trundling up to the school, and the muffled yells of laughter issuing from whichever carriage Malfoy was riding in, where he would be recounting his attack on Harry to his fellow Slytherins. The train lurched, causing Harry to roll over onto his side. Now he was staring at the dusty underside of the seats instead of the ceiling. The floor began to vibrate as the engine roared into life. The express was leaving and nobody knew he was still on it. Then he felt his invisibility cloak fly off him and a voice overhead said, "Watcher, Harry." There was a flash of red light, and Harry's body unfroze. He was able to push himself into a more dignified sitting position, hastily wipe the blood off his bruised face with the back of his hand and raise his head to look up at Tonks, who was holding the invisibility cloak she had just pulled away. "We'd better get out of here, quickly," she said. As the train windows became obscured with steam and the train began to move out of the station. "Come on, we'll jump." Harry hurried after her into the corridor. Tonks pulled open the train door and leapt onto the platform, which seemed to be sliding underneath them as the train gathered momentum. Harry followed her, staggered a little on landing, then straightened up in time to see the gleaming scarlet steam engine pick up speed, round the corner and disappear from view. The cold night air was soothing on his throbbing nose. Tonks was looking at him. He felt angry and embarrassed that he had been discovered in such a ridiculous position. Silently, she handed him back the invisibility cloak. "Who did it?" "Draco Malfoy," said Harry bitterly. "Thanks for, well, no problem," said Tonks, without smiling. From what Harry could see in the darkness, she was as mousy-haired and miserable-looking as she had been when he had met her at the Burrow. "I can fix your nose if you stand still." Harry did not think much of this idea. He had been intending to visit Madame Pomfrey, the matron, in whom he had a little more confidence when it came to healing spells, but it seemed rude to say this. So he stayed stock-still and closed his eyes. "Episky," said Tonks. Harry's nose felt very hot, and then very cold. He raised a hand and felt it gingerly. It seemed to be mended. "Thanks a lot. You'd better put that cloak back on, and we can walk up to the school," said Tonks, still unsmiling. As Harry swung the cloak back over himself, she waved her wand. An immense silvery four-legged creature erupted from it and streaked off into the darkness. "Was that a Patronus?" asked Harry, who had seen Dumbledore send messages like this. "Yes. I'm sending word to the castle that I've got you. Or they'll worry. Come on, we'd better not dawdle." They set off towards the lane that led to the school. "How did you find me?" "I noticed you hadn't left the train, and I knew you had that cloak. I thought you might be hiding for some reason. When I saw the blinds were drawn down on that compartment, I thought I'd check. But what are you doing here, anyway?" Harry asked. "I'm stationed in Hogsmeade now, to give the school extra protection," said Tonks. "Draco Malfoy," said Harry bitterly. "Thanks for, well, no problem," said Tonks, without smiling. From what Harry could see in the darkness, she was as mousy-haired and miserable-looking as she had been when he had met her at the Burrow. "I can fix your nose if you stand still." Harry did not think much of this idea. He had been intending to visit Madame Pomfrey, the matron, in whom he had a little more confidence when it came to healing spells, but it seemed rude to say this. So he stayed stock-still and closed his eyes. "Episky," said Tonks. Harry's nose felt very hot, and then very cold. He raised a hand and felt gingerly. It seemed to be mended. "Thanks a lot. You'd better put that cloak back on, and we can walk up to the school," said Tonks, still unsmiling. As Harry swung the cloak back over himself, she waved her wand. an immense silvery four-legged creature erupted from it and streaked off into the darkness. "Was that a Patronus?" asked Harry, who had seen Dumbledore send messages like this. "Yes. I'm sending word to the castle that I've got you or they'll worry. Come on, we'd better not dawdle." They set off toward the lane that led to the school. "How did you find me?" "I noticed you hadn't left the train, and I knew you had that cloak. I thought you might be hiding for some reason. When I saw the blinds were drawn down on that compartment, I thought I'd check. But what are you doing here, anyway?" Harry asked. "I'm stationed in Hogsmeade now, to give the school extra protection," said Tonks. "Is it just you who's stationed up here, or?" "No, Proudfoot, Savage, and Dawlish are here too." "Dawlish? That Aura Dumbledore attacked last year." "That's right." They trudged up the dark, deserted lane, following the freshly made carriage tracks. Harry looked sideways at Tonks under his cloak. Last year she had been inquisitive, to the point of being a little annoying at times. She had laughed easily, she had made jokes. Now she seemed older and much more serious and purposeful. Was this all the effect of what had happened at the ministry? He reflected uncomfortably that Hermione would have suggested he say something consoling about Sirius to her, that it hadn't been her fault at all, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He was far from blaming her for Sirius's death. It was no more her fault than anyone else's, and much less than his, but he did not like talking about Sirius, if he could avoid it. And so they tramped on through the cold night in silence, Tonks's long cloak whispering on the ground behind them. Having always traveled there by carriage, Harry had never before appreciated just how far Hogwarts was from Hogsmeade Station. With great relief he finally saw the tall pillars on either side of the gates, each topped with a winged boar. He was cold, he was hungry, and he was quite keen to leave this new, gloomy Tonks behind. But when he put out a hand to push open the gates, he found them chained shut. "Alahomora," he said confidently, pointing his wand at the padlock, but nothing happened. "That won't work on these," said Tonks. "Dumbledore bewitched them himself." Harry looked around. "I could climb a wall," he suggested. "No, you couldn't," said Tonks flatly. "Anti-intruder jinxes on all of them. Security's been tightened 100-fold this summer." "Well then," said Harry, starting to feel annoyed at her lack of helpfulness, "I suppose I'll just have to sleep out here and wait for morning." "Someone's coming down for you," said Tonks. "Look." A lantern was bobbing at the distant foot of the castle. Harry was so pleased to see it he felt he could even endure Filch's wheezy criticisms of his tardiness, and rants about how his timekeeping would improve with the regular application of thumbscrews. It was not until the glowing yellow light was 10 feet away from them, and had pulled off his invisibility cloak so that he could be seen, that he recognized, with a rush of pure loathing, the uplit hooked nose and long, black, greasy hair of Severus Snape. "Well, well, well," sneered Snape, taking out his wand and tapping the padlock once, so that the chain snaked backward and the gates creaked open. "Nice of you to turn up, Potter, although you have evidently decided that the wearing of school robes would detract from your appearance." "I couldn't change. I didn't have my," Harry began, but Snape cut across him. "There is no need to wait, Nymphadora. Potter is quite safe in my hands." "I meant Hagrid to get the message," said Tonks, frowning. "Hagrid was late for the start of term feast, just like Potter here, so I took it instead." "And incidentally," said Snape, standing back to allow Harry to pass him, "I was interested to see your new Patronus." He shut the gates in her face with a loud clang and tapped the chains with his wand again, so that they slithered, clinking, back into place. "I think you were better off with the old one," said Snape, the malice in his voice unmistakable. "The new one looks weak." As Snape swung the lantern about, Harry saw, fleetingly, a look of shock and anger on Tonks's face. Then she was covered in darkness once more. "Good night," Harry called to her over his shoulder, as he began the walk up to the school with Snape. "Thanks for everything, see you, Harry." Snape did not speak for a minute or so. Harry felt as though his body was generating waves of hatred so powerful that it seemed incredible that Snape could not feel them burning him. He had loathed Snape from their first encounter, but Snape had placed himself forever and irrevocably beyond the possibility of Harry's forgiveness by his attitude toward Sirius. Whatever Dumbledore said, Harry had had time to think over the summer, and had concluded that Snape's snide remarks to Sirius about remaining safely hidden while the rest of the Order of the Phoenix were off fighting Voldemort had probably been a powerful factor in Sirius rushing off to the Ministry the night that he had died. Harry clung to this notion because it enabled him to blame Snape, which felt satisfying, and also because he knew that if anyone was not sorry that Sirius was dead, it was the man now striding next to him in the darkness. 50 points from Gryffindor for lateness, I think, said Snape. And, let me see, another 20 for your Muggle attire. You know, I don't believe any house has ever been in negative figures this early in the term. We haven't even started pudding. You might have set a record, Potter. The fury and hatred bubbling inside Harry seemed to blaze white-hot, but he would rather have been immobilized all the way back to London than tell Snape why he was late. I suppose you wanted to make an entrance, did you? Snape continued. And with no flying car available, you decided that bursting into the Great Hall halfway through the feast ought to create a dramatic effect. Still Harry remained silent, though he thought his chest might explode. He knew that Snape had come to fetch him for this, for the few minutes when he could needle and torment Harry without anyone else listening. They reached the castle steps at last, and as the great oaken front doors swung open into the vast flagged entrance hall, a burst of talk and laughter and of tinkling plates and glasses greeted them through the doors standing open into the great hall. Harry wondered whether he could slip his invisibility cloak back on, thereby gaining his seat at the long Gryffindor table, which, inconveniently, was the farthest from the entrance hall, without being noticed. As though he had read Harry's mind, however, Snape said, "No cloak. You can walk in so that everyone sees you, which is what you wanted, I'm sure." Harry turned on the spot and marched straight through the open doors, anything to get away from Snape. The great hall with its 4 long house tables and its staff table set at the top of the room was decorated as usual with floating candles that made the plates below glitter and glow. It was all a shimmering blur to Harry, however, who walked so fast that he was passing the Hufflepuff table before people really started to stare, and by the time they were standing up to get a good look at him, he had spotted Ron and Hermione, sped along the benches toward them, and forced his way in between them. "Where have you, blimey, what have you done to your face?" said Ron, goggling at him along with everyone else in the vicinity. "Why, what's wrong with it?" said Harry, grabbing a spoon and squinting at his distorted reflection. "You're covered in blood," said Hermione. "Come here," she raised her wand, said Tergio, and siphoned off the dried blood. "Thanks," said Harry, feeling his now clean face. "How's my nose looking?" "Normal," said Hermione anxiously. "Why shouldn't it?" "Harry, what happened?" "We've been terrified." "I'll tell you later," said Harry curtly. He was very conscious that Ginny, Neville, Dean, and Seamus were listening in. Even nearly headless Nick, the Gryffindor ghost, had come floating along the bench to eavesdrop. But, said Hermione. Not now, Hermione, said Harry, in a darkly significant voice. He hoped very much that they would all assume he had been involved in something heroic, preferably involving a couple of Death Eaters and a Dementor. Of course, Malfoy would spread the story as wide as he could, but there was always a chance it wouldn't reach too many Gryffindor ears. He reached across Ron for a couple of chicken legs and a handful of chips, but before he could take them they vanished, to be replaced with puddings. You missed the sorting, anyway, said Hermione, as Ron dived for a large chocolate gâteau. Hat say anything interesting? Asked Harry, taking a piece of treacle tart. More of the same, really, advising us all to unite in the face enemies, you know. Dumbledore mentioned Voldemort at all? Not yet, but he always saves his proper speech for after the feast, doesn't he? It can't be long now. Snape said Hagrid was late for the feast. You've seen Snape? How come? Said Ron between frenzied mouthfuls of gâteau. Bumped into him, said Harry evasively. Hagrid was only a few minutes late, said Hermione. Look, he's waving at you, Harry. Harry looked up at the staff table and grinned at Hagrid, who was indeed waving at him. Hagrid had never quite managed to comport himself with the dignity of Professor McGonagall, head of Gryffindor House, the top of whose head came up to somewhere between Hagrid's elbow and shoulder as they were sitting side by side, and who was looking disapprovingly at this enthusiastic greeting. Harry was surprised to see the divination teacher, Professor Trelawney, sitting on Hagrid's other side. She rarely left her tower room, and he had never seen her at the start of term feast before. She looked as odd as ever, glittering with beads and trailing shawls, her eyes magnified to enormous size by her spectacles. Having always considered her a bit of a fraud, Harry had been shocked to discover at the end of the previous term that it had been she who had made the prediction that caused Lord Voldemort to kill Harry's parents and attack Harry himself. The knowledge made him even less eager to find himself in her company. Thankfully, this year he would be dropping divination. Her great beacon-like eyes swiveled in his direction. He hastily looked away toward the Slytherin table. Draco Malfoy was miming the shattering of a nose to raucous laughter and applause. Harry dropped his gaze to his treacle tart, his insides burning again. What he would give to fight Malfoy one-on-one. So what did Professor Slughorn want? Hermione asked. To know what really happened at the Ministry, said Harry. Him and everyone else here, sniffed Hermione. People were interrogating us about it on the train, weren't they, Ron? Yeah, said Ron. All wanting to know if you really are the chosen one. There has been much talk on that very subject even amongst the ghosts, interrupted nearly headless Nick, inclining his barely connected head toward Harry, so that it wobbled dangerously on its ruff. I am considered something of a Potter authority. It is widely known that we are friendly. I have assured the spirit community that I will not pester you for information, however. Harry Potter knows that he can confide in me with complete confidence, I told them. I would rather die than betray his trust. That's not saying much, seeing as you're already dead, Ron observed. Once again, you show all the sensitivity of a blunt axe, said nearly headless Nick in affronted tones, and he rose into the air and glided back toward the far end of the Gryffindor table just as Dumbledore got to his feet at the staff table. The talk and laughter echoing around the hall died away almost instantly. The very best of evenings to you, he said, smiling broadly, his arms opened wide as though to embrace the whole room. What happened to his hand? Gasped Hermione. She was not the only one who had noticed. Dumbledore's right hand was as blackened and dead-looking as it had been on the night he had come to fetch Harry from the Dursleys. Whispers swept the room. Dumbledore, interpreting them correctly, merely smiled and shook his purple and gold sleeve over his injury. "Nothing to worry about," he said airily. "Now, to our new students, welcome, to our old students, welcome back. Another year full of magical education awaits you." "His hand was like that when I saw him over the summer," Harry whispered to Hermione. "I thought he'd have cured it by now, though, or Madame Pomfrey would have done." "It looks as if it's died," said Hermione, with a nauseated expression. "But there are some injuries you can't cure. Old curses, and there are poisons without antidotes. And Mr. Filch, our caretaker, has asked me to say that there is a blanket ban on any joke items bought at the shop called Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. Those wishing to play for their house Quidditch teams should give their names to their heads of house as usual. We are also looking for new Quidditch commentators, who should do likewise. We are pleased to welcome a new member of staff this year. Professor Slughorn." Slughorn stood up, his bald head gleaming in the candlelight, his big waistcoated belly casting the table into shadow. "Is a former colleague of mine, who has agreed to resume his old post of potions master." "Potions? Potions?" The word echoed all over the hall as people wondered whether they had heard right. "Potions," said Ron and Hermione together, turning to stare Harry. "But you said Professor Snape, meanwhile," said Dumbledore, raising voice so that it carried over all the muttering, "will be taking the position of defense against the dark arts teacher." "No," said Harry, so loudly that many heads turned in his direction. He did not care. He was staring up at the staff table, incensed. How could Snape be given the defense against the dark arts job, after all this time? Hadn't it been widely known for years that Dumbledore did not trust him to do it? "But Harry, you said that Slughorn was going to be teaching defense against the dark arts," said Hermione. "I thought he was," said Harry, racking his brains to remember when Dumbledore had told him this, but now that he came to think of it, he was unable to recall Dumbledore ever telling him what Slughorn would be teaching. Snape, who was sitting on Dumbledore's right, did not stand up his mention of his name. He merely raised a hand in lazy acknowledgement of the applause from the Slytherin table, yet Harry was sure he could detect a look of triumph on the features he loathed so much. "Well, there's one good thing," he said savagely. "Snape will be gone by the end of the year." "What do you mean?" asked Ron. "That job's jinxed. No one's lasted more than a year. Quirrell actually died doing it. Personally, I'm going to keep my fingers crossed for another death." "Harry," said Hermione, shocked and reproachful. "He might just go back to teaching potions at the end of the year," said Ron reasonably. "That Slughorn bloke might not want to stay long-term." Moody didn't. Dumbledore cleared his throat. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were not the only ones who had been talking. The whole hall had erupted in a buzz of conversation at the news that Snape had finally achieved his heart's desire. Seemingly oblivious to the sensational nature of the news he had just imparted, Dumbledore said nothing more about staff appointments, but waited a few seconds to ensure that the silence was absolute before continuing. "Now, as everybody in this hall knows, Lord Voldemort and his followers are once more at large and gaining in strength." The silence seemed to tauten and strain as Dumbledore spoke. Harry glanced at Malfoy. Malfoy was not looking at Dumbledore, but making his fork hover in mid-air with his wand, as though he found the headmaster's words unworthy of his attention. I cannot emphasize strongly enough how dangerous the present situation is, and how much care each of us at Hogwarts must take to ensure that we remain safe. The castle's magical fortifications have been strengthened over the summer. We are protected in new and more powerful ways, but we must still guard scrupulously against carelessness on the part of any student or member of staff. I urge you, therefore, to abide by any security restrictions that you teachers might impose upon you, however irksome you might find them. In particular, the rule that you are not to be out of bed after hours. I implore you, should you notice anything strange or suspicious within or outside the castle, to report it to a member of staff immediately. I trust you to conduct yourselves, always, with the utmost regard for your own and others' safety. Dumbledore's blue eyes swept over the students before he smiled once more. But now, your beds await, as warm and comfortable as you could possibly wish, and I know that your top priority is to be well rested for your lessons tomorrow. Let us therefore say good night. Pip pip. With the usual deafening scraping noise, the benches moved back and the hundreds of students began to file out of the great hall toward their dormitories. Harry, who was in no hurry at all to leave with the gawping crowd, nor to get near enough to Malfoy to allow him to retell the story of the nose stamping, lagged behind, pretending to retty the lace on his trainer, allowing most of Gryffindor's to draw ahead of him. Hermione had darted ahead to fulfill her prefect's duty of shepherding the first years, but Ron remained with Harry. "What really happened to your nose?" he asked, once they were at the very back of the throng, pressing out of the hall and out of earshot of anyone else. Harry told him. It was a mark of the strength of their friendship that Ron did not laugh. "I saw Malfoy miming something to do with the nose," he said darkly. "Yeah, well, never mind that," said Harry bitterly. "Listen to what he was saying before he found out I was there." Harry had expected Ron to be stunned by Malfoy's boasts. With what Harry considered pure pig-headedness, however, Ron was unimpressed. "Come on, Harry, he was just showing off for Parkinson. What kind of mission would you know who have given him? How do you know Voldemort doesn't need someone at Hogwarts? It wouldn't be the first. I wish yet stop saying THA name, Harry," said a reproachful voice behind them. Harry looked over his shoulder to see Hagrid shaking his head. "Dumbledore uses that name," said Harry stubbornly. "Yeah, well, THA's Dumbledore, innit," said Hagrid mysteriously. "So how come you were late, Harry?" "I was worried. Got held up on the train," said Harry. "Why were you late?" "I was with Grawp," said Hagrid happily. "Lost track o' the time. He's got a new home up in the mountains now. Dumbledore fixed it nice big cave. He's much happier than he was in the forest. We were having a good chat." "Really?" said Harry, taking care not to catch Ron's eye. The last time he had met Hagrid's half-brother, a vicious giant with a talent for ripping up trees by the roots, his vocabulary had comprised 5 words, 2 of which he was unable to pronounce properly. "Oh yeah, he's really come on," said Hagrid proudly. "Ye'll be amazed. I'm thinking o' trainin' him up as me assistant." Ron snorted loudly, but managed to pass it off as a violent sneeze. They were now standing beside the oak front doors. "Anyway, I'll see ye tomorrow, first lesson straight after lunch. Come early and ye can say hello to Buck, I mean, with a wings." Raising an arm in cheery farewell, he headed out of the doors into the darkness. Harry and Ron looked at each other. Harry could tell that Ron was experiencing the same sinking feeling as himself. You're not taking care of magical creatures, are you? Ron shook his head. And you're not either, are you? Harry shook his head too. And Hermione, said Ron, she's not, is she? Harry shook his head again. Exactly what Hagrid would say when he realized his 3 favorite students had given up his subject, he did not like to think. Chapter 9, The Half-Blood Prince. Harry and Ron met Hermione in the common room before breakfast next morning. Hoping for some support in his theory, Harry lost no time in telling Hermione what he had overheard Malfoy saying on the Hogwarts Express. But he was obviously showing off for Parkinson, wasn't he? Interjected Ron quickly, before Hermione could say anything. Well, she said uncertainly, I don't know. It would be like Malfoy to make himself seem more important than he is, but that's a big lie to tell. Exactly, said Harry, but he could not press the point, because so many people were trying to listen into his conversation, not to mention staring at him and whispering behind their hands. It's rude to point, Ron snapped at a particularly minuscule first-year boy, as they joined the queue to climb out of the portrait hole. The boy, who had been muttering something about Harry behind his hand to his friend, promptly turned scarlet and toppled out of the hole in alarm. Ron sniggered. I love being a 6th year. And we're going to be getting free time this year. Whole periods when we can just sit up here and relax. We're going to need that time for studying, Ron, said Hermione, as they set off down the corridor. Yeah, but not today, said Ron. Today's going to be a real loss, I reckon. Hold it, said Hermione, throwing out an arm and halting a passing 4th year, who was attempting to push past her with a lime green disc clutched tightly in his hand. Found Frisbee's band, hand it over, she told him sternly. The scowling boy handed over the snarling Frisbee, ducked under her arm, and took off after his friends. Ron waited for him to vanish, then tugged the Frisbee from Hermione's grip. Excellent, I've always wanted one of these. Hermione's remonstration was drowned by a loud giggle. Lavender Brown had apparently found Ron's remark highly amusing. She continued to laugh as she passed them, glancing back at Ron over her shoulder. Ron looked rather pleased with himself. The ceiling of the great hall was serenely blue and streaked with frail, wispy clouds, just like the squares of sky visible through the high mullioned windows. While they tucked into porridge and eggs and bacon, Harry and Ron told Hermione about their embarrassing conversation with Hagrid the previous evening. But he can't really think we'd continue care of magical creatures, she said, looking distressed. I mean, when has any of us expressed, any enthusiasm? That's it, though, innit, said Ron, swallowing an entire fried egg whole. We were the ones who made the most effort in classes, because we like Hagrid. But he thinks we like the stupid subject. DYA reckon anyone's going to go on to NEWT. Neither Harry nor Hermione answered. There was no need. They knew perfectly well that nobody in their year would want to continue care of magical creatures. They avoided Hagrid's eye and returned his cheery wave only half-heartedly when he left the staff table 10 minutes later. After they had eaten, they remained in their places, awaiting Professor McGonagall's descent from the staff table. The distribution of class schedules was more complicated than usual this year, for Professor McGonagall needed first to confirm that everybody had achieved the necessary O.W.L. grades to continue with their chosen N.E.W.T.S. Hermione was immediately cleared to continue with charms, defense against the dark arts, transfiguration, herbology, arithmancy, ancient runes, and potions, and shot off to a first-period Ancient Runes class without further ado. Neville took a little longer to sort out. His round face was anxious as Professor McGonagall looked down his application and then consulted his O.W.L. results. Herbology, fine, she said. Professor Sprout will be delighted to see you back with an outstanding O.W.L. And you qualify for Defense Against the Dark Arts with exceeds expectations. But the problem is Transfiguration. I'm sorry, Longbottom, but an acceptable really isn't good enough to continue to N.E.W.T. level. Just don't think you'd be able to cope with the coursework. Neville hung his head. Professor McGonagall peered at him through her square spectacles. Why do you want to continue with Transfiguration, anyway? I've never had the impression that you particularly enjoyed it. Neville looked miserable and muttered something about, my grandmother wants. HMPH, snorted Professor McGonagall. It's high time your grandmother learned to be proud of the grandson she's got, rather than the one she thinks she ought to have, particularly after what happened at the ministry. Neville turned very pink and blinked confusedly. Professor McGonagall had never paid him a compliment before. I'm sorry, Longbottom, but I cannot let you into my N.E.W.T. class. I see that you have an exceeds expectations in charm, however why not try for a N.E.W.T. in charms? My grandmother thinks charms is a soft option, mumbled Neville. Take charms, said Professor McGonagall, and I shall drop Augusta a line reminding her that just because she failed her charms O.W.L., the subject is not necessarily worthless. Smiling slightly at the look of delighted incredulity on Neville's face, Professor McGonagall tapped a blank schedule with the tip of her wand and handed it, now carrying details of his new classes, to Neville. Professor McGonagall turned next to Parvati Patil, whose first question was whether Firenze, the handsome centaur, was still teaching divination. He and Professor Trelawney are dividing classes between them this year, said Professor McGonagall, a hint of disapproval in her voice. It was common knowledge that she despised the subject of divination. The 6th year is being taken by Professor Trelawney. Parvati set off for divination 5 minutes later, looking slightly crestfallen. So, Potter, said Professor McGonagall, consulting her notes as she turned to Harry. Charms, Defense Against the Dark Arts, Herbology, Transfiguration, all fine. I must say, I was pleased with your Transfiguration mark, Potter, very pleased. Now, why haven't you applied to continue with potions? I thought it was your ambition to become an Auror. It was, but you told me I had to get an outstanding in my O.W.L., Professor. And so you did when Professor Snape was teaching the subject. Professor Slughorn, however, is perfectly happy to accept N.E.W.T. students with exceeds expectations at O.W.L. Do you wish to proceed with potions? Yes, said Harry, but I didn't buy the books or any ingredients or anything. I'm sure Professor Slughorn will be able to lend you some, said Professor McGonagall. Very well, Potter, here is your schedule. Oh, by the way, 20 hopefuls have already put down their names for the Gryffindor Quidditch team. I shall pass the list to you in due course, and you can fix up trials at your leisure. A few minutes later, Ron was cleared to do the same subjects as Harry, and the two of them left the table together. Look, said Ron delightedly, gazing at his schedule, we've got a free period now and a free period after break, and after lunch. Excellent. They returned to the common room, which was empty apart from a half-dozen 7th years, including Katie Bell, the only remaining member of the original Gryffindor Quidditch team that Harry had joined in his first year. "I thought you'd get that, well done," she called over, pointing at the captain's badge on Harry's chest. "Tell me when you call trials." "Don't be stupid," said Harry, "you don't need to try out. I watched you play for 5 years. You mustn't start off like that," she said warningly. "For all you know, there's someone much better than me out there. Good teams have been ruined before now because captains just kept playing the old faces, or letting in their friends." Ron looked a little uncomfortable, and began playing with the fanged frisbee Hermione had taken from the fourth-year student. It zoomed around the common room, snarling and attempting to take bites of the tapestry. Crookshanks's yellow eyes followed it, and he hissed when it came too close. An hour later, they reluctantly left the sunlit common room for the defense against the dark arts classroom 4 floors below. Hermione was already queuing outside, carrying an armful of heavy books and looking put upon. "We got so much homework for runes," she said anxiously when Harry and Ron joined her. "A 15-inch essay, 2 translations, and I've got to read these by Wednesday." "Shame," yawned Ron. "You wait," she said resentfully. "I bet Snape gives us loads." The classroom door opened as she spoke, and Snape stepped into the corridor, his sallow face framed as ever by 2 curtains of greasy black hair. Silence fell over the queue immediately. "Inside," he said. Harry looked around as they entered. Snape had imposed his personality upon the room already. It was gloomier than usual, as curtains had been drawn over the windows, and was lit by candlelight. New pictures adorned the walls, many of them showing people who appeared to be in pain, sporting grisly injuries, or strangely contorted body parts. Nobody spoke as they settled down, looking around at the shadowy, gruesome pictures. "I have not asked you to take out your books," said Snape, closing the door and moving to face the class from behind his desk. Hermione hastily dropped her copy of Confronting the Faceless back into her bag and stowed it under her chair. "I wish to speak to you, and I want your fullest attention." His black eyes roved over their upturned faces, lingering for a fraction of a second longer on Harry's than anyone else's. "You have had 5 teachers in this subject so far, I believe." "You believe? Like you haven't watched them all come and go, hoping you'd be next," thought Harry scathingly. "Naturally, these teachers will all have had their own methods and priorities. Given this confusion, I am surprised so many of you scraped an O.W.L. in this subject. I shall be even more surprised if all of you manage to keep up with the N.E.W.T. work, which will be more advanced." Snape set off around the edge of the room, speaking now in a lower voice. The class craned their necks to keep him in view. "The dark arts," said Snape, "are many, varied, ever-changing, and eternal. Fighting them is like fighting a many-headed monster, which, each time a neck is severed, sprouts a head even fiercer and cleverer than before. You are fighting that which is unfixed, mutating, indestructible." Harry stared at Snape. It was surely one thing to respect the dark arts as a dangerous enemy, another to speak of them, as Snape was doing, with a loving caress in his voice. "Your defenses," said Snape, a little louder, "must therefore be as flexible and inventive as the arts you seek to undo. These pictures," he indicated a few of them as he swept past, "give a fair representation of what happens to those who suffer. For instance, the Cruciatus Curse." He waved a hand toward a witch who was clearly shrieking in agony. "Feel the Dementor's kiss, a wizard lying huddled and blank-eyed, slumped against a wall. Or provoke the aggression of the Inferius, a bloody mass upon ground. Has an Inferius been seen, then, said Parvati Patil in a high-pitched voice. Is it definite? Is he using them? The Dark Lord has used Inferi in the past, said Snape, which means you would be well advised to assume he might use them again. Now. He set off again around the other side of the classroom toward his desk, and again, they watched him as he walked, his dark robes billowing behind him. You are, I believe, complete novices in the use of non-verbal spells. What is the advantage of a non-verbal spell? Hermione's hand shot into the air. Snape took his time looking around at everybody else, making sure he had no choice, before saying curtly, "Very well, Miss Granger. Your adversary has no warning about what kind of magic you're about to perform," said Hermione, "which gives you a split-second advantage." An answer copied almost word for word from the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 6, said Snape dismissively. Over in the corner, Malfoy sniggered, but correct in essentials. Yes, those who progress in using magic without shouting incantations gain an element of surprise in their spellcasting. Not all wizards can do this, of course. It is a question of concentration and mind power which some, his gaze lingered maliciously upon Harry once more, lack. Harry knew Snape was thinking of their disastrous occlumency lessons of the previous year. He refused to drop his gaze, but glowered at Snape until Snape looked away. You will now divide, Snape went on, into pairs. One partner will attempt to jinx the other without speaking. The other will attempt to repel the jinx in equal silence. Carry on. Although Snape did not know it, Harry had taught at least half the class, everyone who had been a member of the D.A. how to perform a shield charm the previous year. None of them had ever cast the charm without speaking, however. A reasonable amount of cheating ensued. Many people were merely whispering the incantation instead of saying it aloud. Typically, 10 minutes into the lesson, Hermione managed to repel Neville's muttered jellylegs, jinx, without uttering a single word, a feat that would surely have earned her 20 points for Gryffindor from any reasonable teacher, thought Harry bitterly, but which Snape ignored. He swept between them as they practiced, looking just as much like an overgrown bat as ever, lingering to watch Harry and Ron struggling with the task. Ron, who was supposed to be jinxing Harry, was purple in the face, his lips tightly compressed to save himself from the temptation of muttering the incantation. Harry had his wand raised, waiting on tenterhooks to repel a jinx that seemed unlikely ever to come. Pathetic, Weasley, said Snape, after a while. Here, let me show you. He turned his wand on Harry so fast that Harry reacted instinctively. All thought of non-verbal spells forgotten, he yelled, Protego. His shield charm was so strong Snape was knocked off balance and hit a desk. The whole class had looked around and now watched as Snape righted himself, scowling. Do you remember me telling you we are practicing non-verbal spells, Potter? Yes, said Harry stiffly. Yes, sir. There's no need to call me sir, Professor. The words had escaped him before he knew what he was saying. Several people gasped, including Hermione. Behind Snape, however, Ron, Dean, and Seamus grinned appreciatively. Detention, Saturday night, my office, said Snape. I do not take cheek from anyone, Potter, not even the chosen one. That was brilliant, Harry, chortled Ron, once they were safely on their way to break a short while later. You really shouldn't have said it, said Hermione, frowning at Ron. What made you? He tried to jinx me, in case you didn't notice, fumed Harry. I had enough of that during those occlumency lessons. Why doesn't he use another guinea pig for a change? What's Dumbledore playing at, anyway, letting him teach defense? Did you hear him talking about the dark arts? He loves them. All that unfixed, indestructible stuff. Well, said Hermione, I thought he sounded a bit like you. Like me? Yes, when you were telling us what it's like to face Voldemort. You said it wasn't just memorizing a bunch of spells, you said it was just you and your brains and your guts. Well, wasn't that what Snape was saying? That it really comes down to being brave and quick thinking. Harry was so disarmed that she had thought his words as well worth memorizing as the standard book of spells that he did not argue. Harry. Hey, Harry. Harry looked around. Jack Sloper, one of the beaters on last year's Gryffindor Quidditch team, was hurrying toward him holding a roll of parchment. For you, panted Sloper. Listen, I heard you're the new captain. When are you holding trials? I'm not sure yet, said Harry, thinking privately that Sloper would be very lucky to get back on the team. I'll let you know. Oh, right. I was hoping it'd be this weekend, but Harry was not listening. He had just recognized the thin, slanting writing on the parchment. Leaving Sloper in mid-sentence, he hurried away with Ron and Hermione, unrolling the parchment as he went. Dear Harry, I would like to start our private lessons this Saturday. Kindly come along to my office at 8 p.m. I hope you are enjoying your first day back at school. Yours sincerely, Albus Dumbledore P.S. I enjoy acid pops. He enjoys acid pops, said Ron, who had read the message over Harry's shoulder and was looking perplexed. It's the password to get past the gargoyle outside his study, said Harry in a low voice. Ha! Snape's not going to be pleased. I won't be able to do his detention. He, Ron, and Hermione spent the whole of break speculating on what Dumbledore would teach Harry. Ron thought it most likely to be spectacular jinxes and hexes of the type the Death Eaters would not know. Hermione said such things were illegal, and thought it much more likely that Dumbledore wanted to teach Harry advanced defensive magic. After break, she went off to arithmancy while Harry and Ron returned to the common room where they grudgingly started Snape's homework. This turned out to be so complex that they still had not finished when Hermione joined them for their after-lunch free period, though she considerably speeded up the process. They had only just finished when the bell rang for the afternoon's double potions, and they beat the familiar path down to the dungeon classroom that had, for so long, been Snape's. When they arrived in the corridor, they saw that there were only a dozen people progressing to N.E.W.T. level. Crabbe and Goyle had evidently failed to achieve the required O.W.L. grade, but 4 Slytherins had made it through, including Malfoy. 4 Ravenclaws were there, and 1 Hufflepuff, Ernie Macmillan, whom Harry liked despite his rather pompous manner. Harry, Ernie said portentously, holding out his hand as Harry approached, didn't get a chance to speak in defense against the dark arts this morning. Good lesson, I thought, but shield charms are old hat, of course, for us old D.A. lags. And how are you, Ron? Hermione? Before they could say more than fine, the dungeon door opened and Slughorn's belly preceded him out of the door. As they filed into the room, his great walrus mustache curved above his beaming mouth, and he greeted Harry and Zabini with particular enthusiasm. The dungeon was, most unusually, already full of vapors and odd smells. Harry, Ron, and Hermione sniffed interestedly as they passed large, bubbling cauldrons. The 4 Slytherins took a table together, as did the 4 Ravenclaws. This left Harry, Ron, and Hermione to share a table with Ernie. They chose the one nearest a gold-colored cauldron that was emitting one of the most seductive scents Harry had ever inhaled. Somehow it reminded him simultaneously of treacle tart, the woody smell of a broomstick handle, and something flowery he thought he might have smelled at the burrow. He found that he was breathing very slowly and deeply, and that the potion's fumes seemed to be filling him up like drink. A great contentment stole over him. He grinned across at Ron, who grinned back lazily. "Now then, now then, now then," said Slughorn, whose massive outline was quivering through the many shimmering vapors. "Scales out, everyone, and potion kits, and don't forget your copies of Advanced Potion Making." "Sir," said Harry, raising his hand. "Harry, boy. I haven't got a book or scales or anything nors Ron we didn't realize would be able to do the NEWT. Yes, Professor McGonagall did mention. Not to worry, my dear boy, not to worry at all. You can use ingredients from the store cupboard today, and I'm sure we can lend you some scales, and we've got a small stock of old books here. They'll do until you can write to flourish and blots. Slughorn strode over to a corner cupboard, and after a moment's foraging, emerged with two very battered-looking copies of Advanced Potion Making by Libacious Burrage, which he gave to Harry and Ron along with two sets of tarnished scales. "Now then," said Slughorn, returning to the front of the class and inflating his already bulging chest, so that the buttons on his waistcoat threatened to burst off. "I've prepared a few potions for you to have a look at, just out of interest, you know. These are the kind of thing you ought to be able to make after completing your NEWTS. You ought to have heard of M, even if you haven't made M yet. Anyone tell me what this one is?" He indicated the cauldron nearest the Slytherin table. Harry raised himself slightly in his seat, and saw what looked like plain water boiling away inside it. Hermione's well-practiced hand hit the air before anybody else's. Slughorn pointed at her. "It's Veritaserum, a colorless, odorless potion that forces the drinker to tell the truth," said Hermione. Very good," said Slughorn happily. "Now," he continued, pointing at the cauldron nearest the Ravenclaw table, "this one here is pretty well known. Featured in a few ministry leaflets lately too. Who can?" Hermione's hand was fastest once more. "Alt's Polyjuice Potion, sir," she said. Harry too had recognized the slow bubbling, mud-like substance the second cauldron, but did not resent Hermione getting the credit for answering the question. She, after all, was the one who had succeeded in making it, back in their second year. "Excellent. Now, this one yes, my dear," said Slughorn, now looking slightly bemused, as Hermione's hand punched the air again. "It's Amortentia." "It is indeed." "IR seems almost foolish to ask," said Slughorn, who was looking mightily impressed, "but I assume you know what it does." "It's the most powerful love potion in the world," said Hermione. "Quite right. You recognized it, I suppose, by its distinctive mother-of-pearl sheen. And the steam rising in characteristic spirals," said Hermione enthusiastically, "and it's supposed to smell differently to each of according to what attracts us, and I can smell freshly mown grass and new parchment, but she turned slightly pink, and did not complete the sentence. "May I ask your name, my dear?" said Slughorn, ignoring Hermione's embarrassment. "Hermione Granger, sir." "Granger? Can you possibly be related to Hector Dagworth Granger, who founded the most extraordinary society of potioneers?" "No. I don't think so, sir. I'm Muggle-born, you see." Harry saw Malfoy lean close to Nott and whisper something, both of them sniggered, but Slughorn showed no dismay. On the contrary, he beamed and looked from Hermione to Harry, who was sitting next to her. "Aho! One of my best friends is Muggle-born, and she's the best in our year. I'm assuming this is the very friend of whom you spoke, Harry." "Yes, sir," said Harry. Well, take 20 well-earned points for Gryffindor, Miss Granger," said Slughorn genially. Malfoy looked rather as he had done the time Hermione had punched him in the face. Hermione turned to Harry with a radiant expression and whispered, "Did you really tell him I'm the best in the year?" "Oh, Harry. Well, what's so impressive about that?" whispered Ron, who for some reason looked annoyed. "You are the best in the year. I'd told him so if he'd asked me." Hermione smiled but made a shushing gesture, so that they could hear what Slughorn was saying. Ron looked slightly disgruntled. "Amortentia doesn't really create love, of course. It is impossible to manufacture or imitate love. No, this will simply cause a powerful infatuation or obsession. It is probably the most dangerous and powerful potion in this room." "Oh yes," he said, nodding gravely at Malfoy and Nott, both of whom were smirking skeptically. "When you have seen as much of life as I have, you will not underestimate the power of obsessive love." "And now," said Slughorn, "it is time for us to start work." "Sir, you haven't told us what's in this one," said Ernie Macmillan, pointing at a small black cauldron standing on Slughorn's desk. The potion within was splashing about merrily. It was the color of molten gold, and large drops were leaping like goldfish above the surface, though not a particle had spilled. "Aho," said Slughorn again. Harry was sure that Slughorn had not forgotten the potion at all, but had waited to be asked for dramatic effect. "Yes. That? Well, that one, ladies and gentlemen, is a most curious little potion called Felix Felicis. I take it," he turned, smiling, to look at Hermione, who had let out an audible gasp, "that you know what Felix Felicis does, Miss Granger." "It's liquid luck," said Hermione excitedly. "It makes you lucky." The whole class seemed to sit up a little straighter. Now all Harry could see of Malfoy was the back of his sleek blonde head, because he was at last giving Slughorn his full and undivided attention. "Quite right. Take another 10 points for Gryffindor." "Yes, it's a funny little potion, Felix Felicis," said Slughorn. "Desperately tricky to make, and disastrous to get wrong. However, if brewed correctly, as this has been, you will find that all your endeavors tend to succeed, at least until the effects wear off." "Why don't people drink it all the time, sir?" said Terry Boot eagerly. "Because if taken in excess, it causes giddiness, recklessness, and dangerous overconfidence," said Slughorn. "Too much of a good thing, you know, highly toxic in large quantities. But taken sparingly, and very occasionally." "Have you ever taken it, sir?" asked Michael Corner with great interest. "Twice in my life," said Slughorn. "Once when I was 24, once when I was 57. 2 tablespoonfuls taken with breakfast. 2 perfect days." He gazed dreamily into the distance. Whether he was play-acting or not, thought Harry, the effect was good. "And that," said Slughorn, apparently coming back to earth, "is what I shall be offering as a prize in this lesson." There was silence in which every bubble and gurgle of the surrounding potions seemed magnified tenfold. "1 tiny bottle of Felix Felicis," said Slughorn, taking a minuscule glass bottle with a cork in it out of his pocket, and showing it to them all. "Enough for 12 hours' luck. From dawn till dusk, you will be lucky in everything you attempt." Now, I must give you warning that Felix Felicis is a banned substance in organized competition, sporting events, for instance, examinations, or elections. So the winner is to use it on an ordinary day only, and watch how that ordinary day becomes extraordinary. So, said Slughorn, suddenly brisk, how are you to win this fabulous prize? Well, by turning to page 10 of Advanced Potion Making. We have a little over an hour left to us, which should be time for you to make a decent attempt at the draught of living death. I know it is more complex than anything you have attempted before, and I do not expect a perfect potion from anybody. The person who does best, however, will win. Little Felix here. Off you go. There was a scraping as everyone drew their cauldrons toward them and some loud clunks as people began adding weights to their scales, but nobody spoke. The concentration within the room was almost tangible. Harry saw Malfoy riffling feverishly through his copy of Advanced Potion Making. It could not have been clearer that Malfoy really wanted that lucky day. Harry bent swiftly over the tattered book Slughorn had lent him. To his annoyance he saw that the previous owner had scribbled all over the pages, so that the margins were as black as the printed portions. Bending low to decipher the ingredients, even here, the previous owner had made annotations and crossed things out. Harry hurried off toward the store cupboard to find what he needed. As he dashed back to his cauldron, he saw Malfoy cutting up valerian roots as fast as he could. Everyone kept glancing around at what the rest of the class was doing. This was both an advantage and a disadvantage of potions, that it was hard to keep your work private. Within 10 minutes, the whole place was full of bluish steam. Hermione, of course, seemed to have progressed furthest. Her potion already resembled the smooth, black currant-colored liquid mentioned as the ideal halfway stage. Having finished chopping his roots, Harry bent low over his book again. It was really very irritating, having to try and decipher the directions under all the stupid scribbles of the previous owner, who for some reason had taken issue with the order to cut up the saprophyros bean, and had written in the alternative instruction, crush with flat side of silver dagger, releases juice better than cutting. Sir, I think you knew my grandfather, Abraxas Malfoy. Harry looked up. Slughorn was just passing the Slytherin table. Yes, said Slughorn, without looking at Malfoy. I was sorry to hear he had died, although of course it wasn't unexpected, dragon pox at his age. And he walked away. Harry bent back over his cauldron, smirking. He could tell that Malfoy had expected to be treated like Harry or Zabini, perhaps even hoped for some preferential treatment of the type he had learned to expect from Snape. It looked as though Malfoy would have to rely on nothing but talent to win the bottle of Felix Felicis. The saprophyros bean was proving very difficult to cut up. Harry turned to Hermione. Can I borrow your silver knife? She nodded impatiently, not taking her eyes off her potion, which was still deep purple, though according to the book ought to be turning a light shade of lilac by now. Harry crushed his bean with the flat side of the dagger. To his astonishment, it immediately exuded so much juice he was amazed the shriveled bean could have held it all. Hastily scooping it all into the cauldron he saw, to his surprise, that the potion immediately turned exactly the shade of lilac described by the textbook. His annoyance with the previous owner vanishing on the spot, Harry now squinted at the next line of instructions. According to the book, he had to stir counterclockwise until the potion turned clear as water. According to the addition the previous owner made, however, he ought to add a clockwise stir after every 7th counterclockwise stir. Could the old owner be right twice? Harry stirred counterclockwise, held his breath, and stirred once clockwise. The effect was immediate. The potion turned pale pink. "How are you doing that?" demanded Hermione, who was red-faced and whose hair was growing bushier and bushier in the fumes from her cauldron. Her potion was still resolutely purple. "Add a clockwise stir." No, the book says counterclockwise," she snapped. Harry shrugged and continued what he was doing. 7 stirs counterclockwise, 1 clockwise, pause. 7 stirs counterclockwise, 1 stir clockwise. Across the table, Ron was cursing fluently under his breath. His potion looked like liquid licorice. Harry glanced around. As far as he could see, no one else's potion had turned as pale as his. He felt elated, something that had certainly never happened before in this dungeon. "And time's up," called Slughorn. "Stop stirring, please." Slughorn moved slowly among the tables, peering into cauldrons. He made no comment, but occasionally gave the potions a stir or a sniff. At last he reached the table where Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Ernie were sitting. He smiled ruefully at the tar-like substance in Ron's cauldron. He passed over Ernie's navy concoction. Hermione's potion he gave an approving nod. Then he saw Harry's, and a look of incredulous delight spread over his face. "The clear winner," he cried to the dungeon. "Excellent, excellent, Harry. Good Lord, it's clear you've inherited your mother's talent." She was a dab hand at potions, Lily was. "Here you are, then, here you are, 1 bottle of Felix Felicis, as promised, and use it well." Harry slipped the tiny bottle of golden liquid into his inner pocket, feeling an odd combination of delight at the furious looks on the Slytherins' faces, and guilt at the disappointed expression on Hermione's. Ron looked simply dumbfounded. "How did you do that?" he whispered to Harry as they left the dungeon. "Got lucky, I suppose," said Harry, because Malfoy was within earshot. Once they were securely ensconced at the Gryffindor table for dinner, however, he felt safe enough to tell them. Hermione's face became stonier with every word he uttered. "I suppose you think I cheated," he finished, aggravated by her expression. "Well, it wasn't exactly your own work, was it?" she said stiffly. "He only followed different instructions to ours," said Ron. "Could have been a catastrophe, couldn't it? But he took a risk and it paid off." He heaved a sigh. "Slughorn could have handed me that book, but no. I get the one no one's ever written on. Puked on, by the look of page 52, but hang on," said a voice close by Harry's left ear, and he caught a sudden waft of that flowery smell he had picked up in Slughorn's dungeon. He looked around and saw that Ginny had joined them. "Did I hear right? You've been taking orders from something someone wrote in a book, Harry." She looked alarmed and angry. Harry knew what was on her mind at once. "It's nothing," he said reassuringly, lowering his voice. "It's not like, Riddle's diary. It's just an old textbook someone scribbled on. But you're doing what it says." "I just tried a few of the tips written in the margins. Honestly, Ginny, there's nothing funny." "Ginny's got a point," said Hermione, perking up at once. "We ought to check that there's nothing odd about it. I mean, all these funny instructions, who knows?" "Hey," said Harry indignantly, as she pulled his copy of Advanced Potion Making out of his bag and raised her wand. "Specialist Revelio," she said, wrapping it smartly on the front cover. Nothing whatsoever happened. The book simply lay there, looking old and dirty and dog-eared. "Finished," said Harry irritably. "Or do you want to wait and see if it does a few backflips?" "It seems all right," said Hermione, still staring at the book suspiciously. "I mean, it really does seem to be just a textbook." "Good. Then I'll have it back," said Harry, snatching it off the table, but it slipped from his hand and landed open on the floor. Nobody else was looking. Harry bent low to retrieve the book, and as he did so, he saw something scribbled along the bottom of the back cover in the same small, cramped handwriting as the instructions that had won him his bottle of Felix Felicis, now safely hidden inside a pair of socks in his trunk upstairs. Shall I, sir?" "No matter." Harry Dumbledore pointed his wand at the bottle and the cork flew out. "Sir, how did you injure your hand?" Harry asked again, looking at the blackened fingers with a mixture of revulsion and pity. "Now is not the moment for that story, Harry." "Not yet. We have an appointment with Bob Ogden." Dumbledore tipped the silvery contents of the bottle into the pensieve, where they swirled and shimmered, neither liquid nor gas. "After you," said Dumbledore, gesturing toward the bowl. Harry bent forward, took a deep breath, and plunged his face into the silvery substance. He felt his feet leave the office floor. He was falling through whirling darkness, and then, quite suddenly, he was blinking in dazzling sunlight. Before his eyes had adjusted, Dumbledore landed beside him. They were standing in a country lane bordered by high, tangled hedgerows, beneath a summer sky as bright and blue as a forget-me-not. Some 10 feet in front of them stood a short, plump man wearing enormously thick glasses that reduced his eyes to mole-like specks. He was reading a wooden signpost that was sticking out of the brambles on the left-hand side of the road. Harry knew this must be Ogden. He was the only person in sight, and he was also wearing the strange assortment of clothes so often chosen by inexperienced wizards trying to look like muggles. In this case, a frock coat and spats over a striped one-piece bathing costume. Before Harry had time to do more than register his bizarre appearance, however, Ogden had set off at a brisk walk down the lane. Dumbledore and Harry followed. As they passed the wooden sign, Harry looked up at its 2 arms. The one pointing back the way they had come read, "Great Hangleton, 5 miles." The arm pointing after Ogden said, "Little Hangleton, 1 mile." They walked a short way with nothing to see but the hedgerows, the wide blue sky overhead and the swishing, frock-coated figure ahead. Then the lane curved to the left and fell away, sloping steeply down a hillside, so that they had a sudden, unexpected view of a whole valley laid out in front of them. Harry could see a village, undoubtedly Little Hangleton, nestled between 2 steep hills, its church and graveyard clearly visible. Across the valley, set on the opposite hillside, was a handsome manor house surrounded by a wide expanse of velvety green lawn. Ogden had broken into a reluctant trot due to the steep downward slope. Dumbledore lengthened his stride, and Harry hurried to keep up. He thought Little Hangleton must be their final destination and wondered, as he had done on the night they had found Slughorn, why they had to approach it from such a distance. He soon discovered that he was mistaken in thinking that they were going to the village, however. The lane curved to the right, and when they rounded the corner, it was to see the very edge of Ogden's frock coat vanishing through a gap in the hedge. Dumbledore and Harry followed him onto a narrow dirt track bordered by higher and wilder hedgerows than those they had left behind. The path was crooked, rocky, and potholed, sloping downhill like the last one, and it seemed to be heading for a patch of dark trees a little below them. Sure enough, the track soon opened up at the copse, and Dumbledore and Harry came to a halt behind Ogden, who had stopped and drawn his wand. Despite the cloudless sky, the old trees ahead cast deep, dark, cool shadows, and it was a few seconds before Harry's eyes discerned the building half hidden amongst the tangle of trunks. It seemed to him a very strange location to choose for a house, or else an odd decision to leave the trees growing nearby, blocking all light and the view of the valley below. He wondered whether it was inhabited. Its walls were mossy and so many tiles had fallen off the roof that the rafters were visible in places. Nettles grew all around it, their tips reaching the windows, which were tiny and thick with grime. Just as he had concluded that nobody could possibly live there, however, one of the windows was thrown open with a clatter, and a thin trickle of steam or smoke issued from it, as though somebody was cooking. Ogden moved forward quietly, and, it seemed to Harry, rather cautiously. As the dark shadows of the trees slid over him, he stopped again, staring at the front door, to which somebody had nailed a dead snake. Then there was a rustle and a crack, and a man in rags dropped from the nearest tree, landing on his feet right in front of Ogden, who leapt backward so fast he stood on the tails of his frock coat and stumbled. "You're not welcome." The man standing before them had thick hair so matted with dirt it could have been any color. Several of his teeth were missing. His eyes were small and dark and stared in opposite directions. He might have looked comical, but he did not. The effect was frightening, and Harry could not blame Ogden for backing away several more paces before he spoke. Good morning. I'm from the Ministry of Magic. You're not welcome." "Oh, I am sorry. I don't understand you," said Ogden nervously. Harry thought Ogden was being extremely dim. The stranger was making himself very clear in Harry's opinion, particularly as he was brandishing a wand in one hand and a short and rather bloody knife in the other. "You understand him, I'm sure, Harry," said Dumbledore quietly. "Yes, of course," said Harry, slightly nonplussed. "Why can't Ogden?" But as his eyes found the dead snake on the door again, he suddenly understood. "He's speaking Parseltongue." "Very good," said Dumbledore, nodding and smiling. The man in rags was now advancing on Ogden, knife in one hand, wand in the other. "Now, look," Ogden began, but too late. There was a bang, and Ogden was on the ground, clutching his nose, while a nasty yellowish goo squirted from between his fingers. "Morphin," said a loud voice. An elderly man had come hurrying out of the cottage, banging the door behind him so that the dead snake swung pathetically. This man was shorter than the first, and oddly proportioned. His shoulders were very broad and his arms overlong, which, with his bright brown eyes, short scrubby hair, and wrinkled face, gave him the look of a powerful, aged monkey. He came to a halt beside the man with the knife, who was now cackling with laughter at the sight of Ogden on the ground. "Ministry, is it?" said the older man, looking down at Ogden. "Correct," said Ogden angrily, dabbing his face. "And you, I take it, are Mr. Gaunt?" "'S right," said Gaunt. "Got you in the face, did he?" "Yes, he did," snapped Ogden. "Should have made your presence known, shouldn't you?" said Gaunt aggressively. "This is private property. Can't just walk in here and not expect my son to defend himself." "Defend himself against what, man?" said Ogden, clambering back to his feet. "Busybodies. Intruders. Muggles and filth." Ogden pointed his wand at his own nose, which was still issuing large amounts of what looked like yellow pus, and the flow stopped at once. Mr. Gaunt spoke out of the corner of his mouth to Morphin. "Get in the house. Don't argue." This time, ready for it, Harry recognized Parseltongue. Even while he could understand what was being said, he distinguished the weird hissing noise that was all Ogden could hear. Morfin seemed to be on the point of disagreeing, but when his father cast him a threatening look he changed his mind, lumbering away to the cottage with an odd rolling gait and slamming the front door behind him, so that the snake swung sadly again. "It's your son I'm here to see, Mr. Gaunt," said Ogden, as he mopped the last of the pus from the front of his coat. "That was Morfin, wasn't it?" "Ah, that was Morfin," said the old man indifferently. "Are you pureblood?" he asked, suddenly aggressive. "That's neither here nor there," said Ogden coldly, and Harry felt his respect for Ogden rise. Apparently Gaunt felt rather differently. He squinted into Ogden's face and muttered, in what was clearly supposed to be an offensive tone, "Now I come to think about it, I've seen noses like yours down in the village." "I don't doubt it, if your son's been let loose on them," said Ogden. "Perhaps we could continue this discussion inside." "Inside?" "Yes, Mr. Gaunt. I've already told you. I'm here about Morfin." "We sent an owl." "I've no use for owls," said Gaunt. "I don't open letters." "Then you can hardly complain that you get no warning of visitors," said Ogden tartly. "I am here following a serious breach of wizarding law, which occurred here in the early hours of this morning." "All right, all right, all right," bellowed Gaunt. "Come in the bleeding house, then, and much good it'll do you." The house seemed to contain 3 tiny rooms. 2 doors led off the main room, which served as kitchen and living room combined. Morfin was sitting in a filthy armchair beside the smoking fire, twisting a live adder between his thick fingers and crooning softly at it in Parseltongue. "Hissy, hissy, little snaky, slither on the floor, you be good to Morfin, or he'll nail you to the door." There was a scuffling noise in the corner beside the open window, and Harry realized that there was somebody else in the room, a girl whose ragged grey dress was the exact color of the dirty stone wall behind her. She was standing beside a steaming pot on a grimy black stove, and was fiddling around with the shelf of squalid-looking pots and pans above it. Her hair was lank and dull, and she had a plain, pale, rather heavy face. Her eyes, like her brother's, stared in opposite directions. She looked a little cleaner than the 2 men, but Harry thought he had never seen a more defeated-looking person. "Daughter, Merope," said Gaunt grudgingly, as Ogden looked inquiringly toward her. "Good morning," said Ogden. She did not answer, but with a frightened glance at her father turned her back on the room and continued shifting the pots on the shelf behind her. "Well, Mr. Gaunt," said Ogden, "to get straight to the point, we have reason to believe that your son, Morfin, performed magic in front of a muggle late last night." There was a deafening clang. Merope had dropped one of the pots. "Pick it up," Gaunt bellowed at her. "That's it. Grub on the floor like some filthy muggle. What's your wand for, you useless sack of muck?" "Mr. Gaunt, please," said Ogden in a shocked voice, as Merope, who had already picked up the pot, flushed blotchily scarlet, lost her grip on the pot again, drew her wand shakily from her pocket, pointed it at the pot, and muttered a hasty, inaudible spell that caused the pot to shoot across the floor away from her, hit the opposite wall, and crack in 2. Morfin let out a mad cackle of laughter. Gaunt screamed, "Mend it, you pointless lump, mend it." Merope stumbled across the room, but before she had time to raise her wand, Ogden had lifted his own and said firmly, "Reparo." The pot mended itself instantly. Gaunt looked for a moment as though he was going to shout at Ogden, but seemed to think better of it. Instead, he jeered at his daughter, "Lucky the nice man from the ministry's here, isn't it? Perhaps he'll take you off my hands, perhaps he doesn't mind dirty squibs." Without looking at anybody or thanking Ogden, Merope picked up the pot and returned it, hands trembling, to its shelf. She then stood quite still, her back against the wall between the filthy window and the stove, as though she wished for nothing more than to sink into the stone and vanish. "Mr. Gaunt," Ogden began again, "as I've said, the reason for my visit, I heard you the first time," snapped Gaunt. "And so what?" Morfin gave a muggle a bit of what was coming to him. "What about it, then?" "Morfin has broken wizarding law," said Ogden sternly. "Morfin has broken wizarding law." Gaunt imitated Ogden's voice, making it pompous and sing-song. Morfin cackled again. "He taught a filthy muggle a lesson. That's illegal now, is it?" "Yes," said Ogden. "I'm afraid it is." He pulled from an inside pocket a small scroll of parchment and unrolled it. "What's that, then, his sentence?" said Gaunt, his voice rising angrily. "It is a summons to the ministry for a hearing summons." "Summons? Who do you think you are, summoning my son anywhere?" "I'm head of the magical law enforcement squad," said Ogden. "And you think we're scum, do you?" screamed Gaunt, advancing on Ogden now, with a dirty yellow-nailed finger pointing at his chest. "Scum who'll come running when the ministry tells 'em to. Do you know who you're talking to, you filthy little mudblood, do you?" "I was under the impression that I was speaking to Mr. Gaunt," said Ogden, looking wary, but standing his ground. "That's right," roared Gaunt. For a moment, Harry thought Gaunt was making an obscene hand gesture, but then realized that he was showing Ogden the ugly, black-stoned ring he was wearing on his middle finger, waving it before Ogden's eyes. "See this? See this? Know what it is? Know where it came from? Centuries it's been in our family, that's how far back we go, and pure blood all the way. Know how much I've been offered for this, with the Peveril coat of arms engraved on the stone?" "I've really no idea," said Ogden, blinking as the ring sailed within an inch of his nose, "and it's quite beside the point, Mr. Gaunt. Your son has committed." With a howl of rage, Gaunt ran toward his daughter. For a split second, Harry thought he was going to throttle her as his hand flew to her throat. Next moment, he was dragging her toward Ogden by a gold chain around her neck. "See this?" he bellowed at Ogden, shaking a heavy gold locket at him, while Merope spluttered and gasped for breath. I see it," said Ogden hastily. "Slytherins," yelled Gaunt. "Sullus are Slytherins. We're his last living descendants. What do you say to that, eh?" "Mr. Gaunt, your daughter," said Ogden in alarm, but Gaunt had already released Merope. She staggered away from him, back to her corner, massaging her neck and gulping for air. "So," said Gaunt triumphantly, as though he had just proved a complicated point beyond all possible dispute. "Don't you go talking to us as if we're dirt on your shoes. Generations of purebloods, wizards, all more than you can say, I don't doubt." And he spat on the floor at Ogden's feet. Morfin cackled again. Merope, huddled beside the window, her head bowed and her face hidden by her lank hair, said nothing. "Mr. Gaunt," said Ogden doggedly, "I am afraid that neither your ancestors nor mine have anything to do with the matter in hand. I am here because of Morfin and the muggle he accosted late last night. Our information," he glanced down at his scroll of parchment, "is that Morfin performed a jinx, or hex on the said muggle, causing him to erupt in highly painful hives." Morfin giggled. "Be quiet, boy," snarled Gaunt in Parselton, and Morfin fell silent again. "And so what if he did, then?" Gaunt said defiantly to Ogden. "I expect you've wiped the muggle's filthy face clean for him, and his memory to boot." "That's hardly the point," is it, Mr. Gaunt? Said Ogden. This was an unprovoked attack on a defenseless, I had you marked out as a Muggle lover the moment I saw you, sneered Gaunt, and he spat on the floor again. This discussion is getting us nowhere, said Ogden firmly. It is clear from your son's attitude that he feels no remorse for his actions. He glanced down at his scroll of parchment again. Morfin will attend a hearing on the 14th of September to answer the charges of using magic in front of a Muggle and causing harm and distress to that same Mug. Ogden broke off. The jingling, clopping sounds of horses and loud, laughing voices were drifting in through the open window. Apparently the winding lane to the village passed very close to the copse where the house stood. Gaunt froze, listening, his eyes wide. Morfin hissed and turned his face toward the sounds, his expression hungry. Merope raised her head. Her face, Harry saw, was starkly white. My God, what an eyesore, rang out a girl's voice, as clearly audible through the open window as if she had stood in the room beside them. Couldn't your father have that hovel cleared away, Tom? It's not ours, said a young man's voice. Everything on the other side of the valley belongs to us, but that cottage belongs to an old tramp called Gaunt, and his children. The son's quite mad. You should hear some of the stories they tell in the village. The girl laughed. The jingling, clopping noises were growing louder and louder. Morfin made to get out of his armchair. Keep your seat, said his father warningly, in Parseltongue. Tom, said the girl's voice again, now so close they were clearly right beside the house. I might be wrong, but has somebody nailed a snake to that door? Good Lord, you're right, said the man's voice. That'll be the son. I told you he's not right in the head. Don't look at it, Cecilia, darling. The jingling and clopping sounds were now growing fainter again. Darling, whispered Morfin in Parseltongue, looking at his sister. Darling, he called her. So he wouldn't have you anyway. Merope was so white Harry felt sure she was going to faint. What's that? Said Gaunt sharply, also in Parseltongue, looking from his son to his daughter. What did you say, Morfin? She likes looking at that Muggle, said Morfin, a vicious expression on his face as he stared at his sister, who now looked terrified. Always in the garden when he passes, peering through the hedge at him, isn't she? And last night, Merope shook her head jerkily, imploringly, but Morfin went on ruthlessly, hanging out of the window waiting for him to ride home, wasn't she? Hanging out of the window to look at a Muggle, said Gaunt quietly. All three of the Gaunts seemed to have forgotten Ogden, who was looking both bewildered and irritated at this renewed outbreak of incomprehensible hissing and rasping. Is it true? Said Gaunt in a deadly voice, advancing a step or two toward the terrified girl. My daughter, pure-blooded descendant of Salazar Slytherin, hankering after a filthy, dirt-veined Muggle. Merope shook her head frantically, pressing herself into the wall, apparently unable to speak. But I got him, father, cackled Morfin. I got him as he went by, and he didn't look so pretty with hives all over him, did he, Merope? You disgusting little squib, you filthy little blood traitor, roared Gaunt, losing control, and his hands closed around his daughter's throat. Both Harry and Ogden yelled no, at the same time. Ogden raised his wand and cried, Relascio. Gaunt was thrown backward, away from his daughter. He tripped over a chair and fell flat on his back. With a roar of rage, Morfin leapt out of his chair and ran at Ogden, brandishing his bloody knife and firing hexes indiscriminately from his wand. Ogden ran for his life. Dumbledore indicated that they ought to follow, and Harry obeyed, Merope's screams echoing in his ears. Ogden hurtled up the path and erupted onto the main lane, his arms over his head, where he collided with the glossy chestnut horse ridden by a very handsome, dark-haired young man. Both he and the pretty girl riding beside him on a grey horse roared with laughter at the sight of Ogden, who bounced off the horse's flank and set off again, his frock coat flying, covered from head to foot in dust, running pell-mell up the lane. "I think that will do, Harry," said Dumbledore. He took Harry by the elbow and tugged. Next moment, they were both soaring weightlessly through darkness, until they landed squarely on their feet, back in Dumbledore's now twilit office. "What happened to the girl in the cottage?" said Harry at once, as Dumbledore lit extra lamps with a flick of his wand. "Merope, or whatever her name was." "Oh, she survived," said Dumbledore, reseating himself behind his desk and indicating that Harry should sit down too. Ogden apparat back to the ministry, and returned with reinforcements within 15 minutes. Morfin and his father attempted to fight, but both were overpowered, removed from the cottage, and subsequently convicted by the Wizengamot. Morfin, who already had a record of Muggle attacks, was sentenced to 3 years in Azkaban. Marvolo, who had injured several ministry employees in addition to Ogden, received 6 months. "Marvolo?" Harry repeated wonderingly. "That's right," said Dumbledore, smiling in approval. "I am glad to see you're keeping up. That old man was Voldemort's grandfather, yes," said Dumbledore. Marvolo, his son, Morfin, and his daughter, Merope, were the last of the Gaunts, a very ancient wizarding family noted for a vein of instability and violence that flourished through the generations, due to their habit of marrying their own cousins. Lack of sense coupled with a great liking for grandeur meant that the family gold was squandered several generations before Marvolo was born. He, as you saw, was left in squalor and poverty, with a very nasty temper, a fantastic amount of arrogance and pride, and a couple of family heirlooms that he treasured just as much as his son, and rather more than his daughter. "So Merope," said Harry, leaning forward in his chair and staring at Dumbledore, "so Merope was." "Sir, does that mean she was Voldemort's mother?" "It does," said Dumbledore. "And it so happens that we also had a glimpse of Voldemort's father. I wonder whether you noticed. The Muggle Morphin attacked the man on the horse." "Very good indeed," said Dumbledore, beaming. "Yes, that was Tom Riddle Sr., the handsome Muggle who used to go riding past the Gaunt cottage, and for whom Merope Gaunt cherished a secret, burning passion. And they ended up married," Harry said in disbelief, unable to imagine two people less likely to fall in love. "I think you are forgetting," said Dumbledore, "that Merope was a witch. I do not believe that her magical powers appeared to their best advantage when she was being terrorized by her father. Once Marvolo and Morfin were safely in Azkaban, once she was alone and free for the first time in her life, then, I am sure, she was able to give full rein to her abilities, and to plot her escape from the desperate life she had led for 18 years. Can you not think of any measure Merope could have taken to make Tom Riddle forget his Muggle companion and fall in love with her instead?" "The Imperious Curse," Harry suggested. "Or a love potion." "Very good. Personally, I am inclined to think that she used a love potion. I am sure it would have seemed more romantic to her, and I do not think it would have been very difficult, some hot day, when Riddle was riding alone, to persuade him to take a drink of water. In any case, within a few months of the scene we have just witnessed, the village of Little Hangleton enjoyed a tremendous scandal. You can imagine the gossip it caused when the squire's son ran off with the tramp's daughter, Merope. But the villager's shock was nothing to Marvolo's. He returned from Azkaban, expecting to find his daughter dutifully awaiting his return, with a hot meal ready on his table. Instead, he found a clear inch of dust and her note of farewell, explaining what she had done. From all that I have been able to discover, he never mentioned her name or existence from that time forth. The shock of her desertion may have contributed to his early death, or perhaps he had simply never learned to feed himself. Azkaban had greatly weakened Marvolo, and he did not live to see Morfin return to the cottage. And Merope. She died, didn't she? Wasn't Voldemort brought up in an orphanage? Yes, indeed, said Dumbledore. We must do a certain amount of guessing here, although I do not think it is difficult to deduce what happened. You see, within a few months of their runaway marriage, Tom Riddle reappeared at the manor house in Little Hangleton without his wife. The rumor flew around the neighborhood that he was talking of being hoodwinked and taken in. What he meant, I am sure, is that he had been under an enchantment that had now lifted, though I dare say he did not dare use those precise words for fear of being thought insane. When they heard what he was saying, however, the villagers guessed that Merope had lied to Tom Riddle, pretending that she was going to have his baby, and that he had married her for this reason. But she did have his baby. But not until a year after they were married. Tom Riddle left her while she was still pregnant. What went wrong? Asked Harry. Why did the love potion stop working? Again, this is guesswork, said Dumbledore, but I believe that Merope, who was deeply in love with her husband, could not bear to continue enslaving him by magical means. I believe that she made the choice to stop giving him the potion. Perhaps, besotted as she was, she had convinced herself that he would by now have fallen in love with her in return. Perhaps she thought he would stay for the baby's sake. If so, she was wrong on both counts. He left her, never saw her again, and never troubled to discover what became of his son. The sky outside was inky black, and the lamps in Dumbledore's office seemed to glow more brightly than before. I think that will do for tonight, Harry, said Dumbledore after a moment or two. Yes, sir, said Harry. He got to his feet, but did not leave. Sir, is it important to know all this about Voldemort's past? Very important, I think, said Dumbledore. And it's got something to do with the prophecy. It has everything to do with the prophecy. Right, said Harry, a little confused, but reassured all the same. He turned to go, then another question occurred to him, and he turned back again. Sir, am I allowed to tell Ron and Hermione everything you've told me? Dumbledore considered him for a moment, then said, Yes, I think Mr. Weasley and Miss Granger have proved themselves trustworthy. But Harry, I am going to ask you to ask them not to repeat any of this to anybody else. It would not be a good idea if word got around how much I know, or suspect, about Lord Voldemort's secrets. No, sir, I'll make sure it's just Ron and Hermione. Good night. He turned away again, and was almost at the door when he saw it. Sitting on one of the little spindle-legged tables that supported so many frail-looking silver instruments, was an ugly gold ring set with a large, cracked, black stone. Sir, said Harry, staring at it. That ring, yes, said Dumbledore. You were wearing it when we visited Professor Slughorn that night. So I was, Dumbledore agreed. But isn't it, sir, isn't it the same ring Marvolo Gaunt showed Ogden? Dumbledore bowed his head. The very same. But how come? Have you always had it? No, I acquired it very recently, said Dumbledore. A few days before I came to fetch you from your aunt and uncle's, in fact. That would be around the time you injured your hand, then, sir. Around that time, yes, Harry. Harry hesitated. Dumbledore was smiling. Sir, how exactly? Too late, Harry. You shall hear the story another time. Good night. Good night, sir.